Excuse me,
Right.
Chair. Could I raise an issue first?
Right.
Okay. I just think it's important that the committee, which has responsibility for scrutinising the Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure with responsibility for Irish language, we need to express our concern at the comments of Gregory Campbell in the Assembly. And I think it would be appropriate that we would write to the Standards and Privileges Committee asking for a view on whether the comments are a breach of the Code of Conduct.
I think our responsibility as a committee is to monitor the work of the department, not to scrutinise the behaviour of Assembly members in the Assembly chamber. There are other procedures and processes for that, and I'm sure people will follow those in due course.
But I mean, I have received huge amounts of complaints about this issue, and given the responsibility that we have, I think it would be appropriate that we would express concern.
Well, I don't think that's in order. It's outside the remit of this committee. I'll take some guidance on that, but that's my personal view that it is.
Chair,
Sure.
sorry, Chair, as the member says, the committee has a remit to scrutinise the Department for Culture, Arts and Leisure. My understanding would be that behaviour in the chamber is a matter for the Speaker or Deputy Speaker, whoever's in the chair at the time, and members, I think, can refer to the Standards and Privileges as individual members. I'm trying to think back. Do I have an example in my mind of a committee doing it, and I can't think of one. Chair, I'm happy to go away and seek advice on what the protocols are, because it's a situation that I haven't come across before. But I know there are protocols around chamber behaviour that are dealt with by the Speaker, and then there are protocols around individual members making representations to the Standards and Privileges Committee. It's an unusual case, and I don't have sufficient protocols off the top of my head. I'd need to take that away and see what the process is, Chair.
I think we'd be setting a very difficult precedent in any case, in that there are members of this committee who might well want to raise the issue around the behaviour of the Culture Minister in opposing expressions of culture from another community and demonising that community. They might view her behaviour in that way. Now, we could then go down the line of let's have a vote on, do people endorse her opposition to expressions of Orange culture, and we can have a vote on that, discuss that, but it takes us away from what we're supposed to do, our core business, and it would be totally divisive and I think waste of time. So we can start down that road, but that's where it would take us, and I don't think you or I would want to go down that road. Yes.
Chair, like the other member, I too have received quite a number of complaints about this, and given that this committee is one of this committee's arm's length bodies, as far as Nagiliga, who are integrally involved in the promotion of language issues, that this is an issue, I believe, for this committee and for it to take up on. Many people are very offended by what has been said. And,
really offended?
We are. Well, I don't think it would be done in any other language in any other setting. So I just want to put that on record. Perhaps the clerk will come back with it, please.
Chair, Forest Gaelic is not anything to do with this committee. This is a scrutiny committee. This is not the department. This is not the government. It's our job to scrutinise the government, and it is our job to scrutinise the department and the actions of the minister, not independent, separate members of the Assembly. If that were the case, you're quite rightly identified. There would be many a person would be looking at none closer than the Minister for her behaviour in relation to cultural matters pertaining to the Orange Institution in North Belfast. I do have to say, when I read in the press that members, including the Minister, had gone to the Speaker's office. The 3 Deputy Speakers had taken action against Mr Campbell, and he was banned from the chamber on Tuesday. So really this is a matter to be dealt with by those in the Assembly Commission and the Speaker's office, not by this committee.
Thank you. Move on then. The members are reminded that the switch off mobile phones interfere with the system, and the meeting will be on camera. Any relevant financial or other interests should be declared in relation to today's business, and please ensure the volume on all tablet devices off. Quickest way to do this is press function and F8. In terms of apologies, the clerk has received apologies from following members: David Hilditch. Are members aware of any other apologies?
Just, I need to leave early because we have a ministerial visit in the constituency, Chairman.
Well, if you leave early, then you'll be back early.
Well, we'll see.
We would seriously miss the input from the Deputy Chair if he wasn't.
Didn't work.
Draft minutes of the meeting on the 21st of October are at page 5, and could I get agreement from members that's an accurate record of the meeting?
Great.
Could I just say before we have the presentations that it is a busy agenda today. We have the Sporting and Ice session afterwards. It would be helpful if we could be brief on some of the points, particularly when we come to the first one. I'll make an observation on that. But to refer members to the clerk's memo about Volunteer Now and the World Police and Fire Games there on page 10. The situation there is that we're not actually really looking at the work of Volunteer Now. That falls within social development. It's really to get an assessment from them on the level of volunteering and the impact through events that they've been involved with, World Peace and Fire Games and the Giro d'Italia. As you see there, also mention was made of officials from North West 200 commenting at the committee about the importance of volunteers there as well. So if we could keep questions focused very much on the level of volunteering.
Many questions, Chair. Are we allowed?
You'll not need more than one. You'll not even need one.
It's a good presentation, isn't it?
Thank you indeed.
Could
Could I welcome Wendy Osborne, the Chief Executive, and Denise Hayward, who's the Director of Outreach and Capacity Building at Volunteer Now. And thank you for coming, and I invite you to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much for the opportunity. This morning we have been asked to talk about the spectacular events that happened in Northern Ireland, the World Police and Fire Games and the Giro d'Italia, and the involvement of volunteers. And I'd just like to start by, I suppose, mentioning first London 2012, the Olympics and Paralympic Games, because that was really the start of our journey in terms of involving volunteers in major events. And it was that event that created a tremendous catalyst for us to then take forward locally in Northern Ireland. And I think both of the events we're going to talk about, the World Police and Fire Games and the Giro d'Italia, would really not have been so successful. I think everybody admits that without the involvement of the volunteers. And the quote that you have on your briefing paper where Lord Coe said about the Olympic Games, that it's the difference between the good games and the great games are the volunteers. So I'm going to ask my colleague Denise Hayward to take you through some of the information.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you an overview of the World Police and Fire Games and the volunteer team, and then the Giro d'Italia. So the World Police and Fire Games took place in August 2013, and we had over 5,000 applications to volunteer with the Games, and we took through a full selection process, which means that we saw people face to face. We were very fortunate that the Fire and Rescue Service were able to let us use their buildings at Boucher Road, and we set up a portable interview point, and we interviewed people over a period of 6 weeks. So we had 249 volunteers who were selection event volunteers, and again we modelled that on what had happened with London 2012, and it worked very well. So overall, we had just over 330 people who volunteered with us during Games time. They did a range of roles, and that were things like meet and greet, translation, field of play, helping make sure that the equipment is in the right place at the right time. We had people helping with driving. We had people doing ceremonies, making sure the medals were in the right place at the right time. We had a nice team of volunteer photographers as well who took pictures and recorded the event. So there was a whole raft of different roles. We delivered a number of different types of training. We had one substantial event, which was an orientation training session for all of the volunteers were invited to that. So we had roughly 3,000 people at the King's Hall, and that was a really inspiring event, and people found that really helpful. And we also delivered a range of World Host training, which is customer service, recognised customer service qualification, and over 970 volunteers took part in that World Host training. We had a diverse mix of people from different age groups. We had quite a substantial number of young people. 39% of our volunteers were 16 to 24. We had 23% of our volunteers over 50. We had 6.6% of our volunteers came from neighbourhood renewal areas. A good split of gender, 60-40% male, female male. And 7% of our volunteers had a disability. All of the district council areas in Northern Ireland were covered. We had volunteers from as far away as Canada. 5% of our volunteers came from the mainland, so a mixture of people from Southern Ireland as well. So it was a really good mix. And on average, people were giving just over 24 hours to the games during the period. So I've just given you a few of the snippets in your briefing there, the feedback from volunteers. I'll not go through all of it, but I think generally there was a sense that people really enjoyed the experience. They would definitely encourage their friends to do it again. They had a very positive engagement. I thought it was interesting, 69% were more physically active on volunteering days than non-volunteering days. It just does prove that volunteering is good for you, which is great. And I've just put a wee quote in there, from one of our participants. It was the best volunteering experience I've had the privilege of participating in, and I had a great time being part of Team 2013. And I've seen that, over the last months, people even now will still email us and still be in touch with us because of the really lovely experience they had. And then we were really fortunate then last year to be able to have a legacy event in Northern Ireland, which was the Giro d'Italia Big Start, and that was the cycling event where we all went pink for a short period of time. We had over 1,200 applications to volunteer, and we had just about 950 volunteers. Most of those volunteers were marshals on that occasion. The variety of the roles wasn't as wide as it had been in the previous in the World Police and Fire Games, but it was quite complex because the roads were closing. We had to have marshals in position, so it was a more complex piece of work in a sense because of the kind of role that it was. We developed the training in partnership with Cycling Ireland and Cycling Ulster, with the police and with the race organisers, and then we delivered the training on behalf of the event. And we had over 1,000 people took part in the training, with 96 doing World Host qualifications. For the Giro, we didn't have so many young people because it was during exam time. It was the beginning of May, so anybody who was doing their A-levels just couldn't help us. So we actually had a much bigger number of over 55s in that scenario. And then again, disability levels about the same. And again, people from all across Northern Ireland, from the Republic, and again from the UK, which was great. And our average volunteer hours were just over 23 hours for that event. And again, I've just included there a few comments and feedback, and people, again, 97% recommended to a friend. I think the Giro, despite the weather, particularly on the Saturday, which was an extremely wet day, and we did have very cold volunteers at some points when they were getting back on the bus, but the spirit of the volunteers and the camaraderie and the team effort, and people just really enjoyed the event. And you can see that again from my wee quote there. Thoroughly enjoyed the volunteer experience. Training provided was excellent. Communication was great in the build-up. Uniform collection was very smooth. Being upgraded to team leader was great, and being on the ground witnessing the Giro was fantastic. And I know any of us who were on the ground and witnessed the Giro did also agree that it was fantastic. So there we go.
Okay, so just want to take you through some of the legacy points in relation to both of those. Obviously, there is certainly that feel-good factor about that range of number of our citizens being involved in world stage events. I think for them and for the events themselves, that is definitely a real success story. We also then had a diverse range of individuals, 1,000 from the World Police and Fire Games, who wanted to do the same again. In fact, they would have done the same again every month if we could have offered them the opportunity. So you had a really motivated group of people, and we still keep those people with us, and they still do things in relation to volunteering. And we see that actually people began to see the value that volunteers could add to those kind of events. And the Northern Ireland Tourist Board are certainly looking at that. And then there are other things like not only London 2012, but we were involved in volunteering with the Irish Open. We had the British Transplant Games. When the Balmoral show moved premises, they really felt that they could involve volunteers in that huge Northern Ireland event. And we've been involved with that, and now with the Armagh show as well. And other events like the Northwest 200 involves 800 volunteers and always has done. And there's the Circuit of Ireland Rally, the City of Culture, Belfast Festival of Queens. All the European Heritage Open Days now actually involve volunteers much more than they did 2 years ago. And I think that's a really added value as well. And in relation to sport, because both of those two large events were very much sporting events, the legacy of that is that we continue to work with Sport NI in relation to the involvement of volunteers. For sporting, just for day-to-day sport in Northern Ireland, it takes 35,000 volunteers to keep, you know, the Saturday morning pitches open and all of that. But in relation to their events, we've been looking at how we might become supportive of that with relation to volunteering. So in the next couple of weeks, table tennis are doing an event, and there'll be volunteers involved with that more so than there were before. So I think there is that legacy of both of a population in Northern Ireland motivated to be involved, and then us working towards making sure there are opportunities for them to do that. There are challenges. The short-term nature events means that you're working from one event to the next. I suppose for Volunteer Now, we'd really like to see Team Northern Ireland continue in some capacity so that we could be ready to go to any event and have a pool of volunteers ready and willing to do whatever was required. And there is a need to recruit new volunteers. People's lives change, and we do need to keep up with recruitment of that for events. And also for events sometimes, and we hope that our influence with people organising events, that they will see that this is not the case, not to think of volunteering at the last minute, but to actually build the volunteering in as part of the event planning from the very start, because it does add value and there are people who are really motivated and would like to get involved. And I think all of the feedback from the general public and from the organisers of both those major events for Northern Ireland clearly indicated that volunteering really helped to make them work better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If we could start off just asking, you obviously receive and collate yourselves feedback from the volunteers about the benefits, and you've mentioned some examples of that this morning. Are there ways in which those benefits can be marketed and promoted as a way of recruiting more volunteers? And how does that fit in with your programme?
Well, I certainly think that direct benefit immediately was the recruitment process for World Police and Fire Games, because I was involved in the interviewing, and I don't know how many volunteers that I interviewed said, I saw the Games Makers in London 2012 and I wanted to be like that. So I think the visibility of volunteering in those big events has helped recruit volunteers more broadly, because I think people see it as something that they can then buy into as part of a lifestyle choice, which is kind of underpinning those big events. And we have volunteers who did London 2012, who then did the Games for us and the Giro, but have also taken part in the Commonwealth Games, have done the Grand Depart for the Tour de France this year, and are actively saving like mad to go to the next World Police and Fire Games. So there are people who literally go from event to event, not just here, but across the UK and wider.
And I think just to add to that, I think for the World Police and Fire Games, almost 50% of the individuals who volunteer had never volunteered before.
Yeah.
So actually it enabled people to try volunteering, and our experience is that once you try it and you've had a good experience, you do more.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gordon Dunn.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much, ladies, for coming in, and what's a very positive presentation on a wet morning. Volunteers obviously need help with insurance and, on occasion, security clearance. What can your organisation do to overcome those barriers, or just to make progress on those issues? And is this an issue that, are those issues that cause problems and deter people from engaging?
Well, in general, there are often recruitment processes associated with volunteering that sometimes, for instance, require volunteers to have a police records check. And that is particularly to do with the role the volunteers playing. Now, we have not found, and we monitor this quite closely and have done over a number of years, that actually it is a detriment to people volunteering. I think people accept now that there are risk issues, and that if they're told up front about that, that's fine. In relation to the events, in terms of insurance, that can be tricky. I mean, we had quite a number of issues, particularly with the Giro d'Italia, because volunteers were standing on the road, and there were a number of insurance issues to go through. So I would say, in general, from volunteering, insurance has become more of an issue than it was 20 years ago, most definitely. And we do provide information to organisations and groups to help them with that. And in relation to major events, each major event has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis in relation to insurance.
Thank you.
It's because sometimes the event organiser provides insurance, and sometimes it's, in our case, we're providing it because we're providing the volunteers. So it can be a complex picture with those bigger events, and that's why you just need to be looking at each one individually.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Thanks very much.
Karen McKevitt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. And I suppose as one that got, it was an honour to give the medals out in the World Police and Fire Games event that was held in Kilbrony Park last year. Some of my children volunteered, and it was their first time volunteering. And I have to say from, I suppose, the hands-on experience, the way that, particularly in the World Police and Fire Games, the way that you kept the data, that you're able to send out at the touch of a button back to, an invite to the like of the Giro d'Italia and stuff. So I think that has opened up new doors for volunteering, and it was very, very impressive run, and I hope you take advantage of that. But what I would like to say, because you have all of this, you mentioned the opportunities that's there for the like of the 16-year-olds that volunteered for the first time on filling in an application form for the like of their UCAS, that they're able to volunteer and stuff. So on that basis, I'd like to know, have you any plans, or do you communicate with schools, particularly with the 16-year-olds plus, on how to volunteer, and when sporting events are coming, and for tourism and the way it's come, so there's a whole new door opening for volunteers. I want to know, have you any plans to introduce, children can come in and they can do like the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and they're able to write down their experience of it, and yes, it gets some points on their UCAS form, etc. So that communication with schools, are you opening doors there, or have they already been opened?
We're doing a bit of both. We support the delivery of the Millennium Volunteers programme in Northern Ireland, which is Department of Education funded. It recognises volunteering for young people who are between 14 and 25, and they can get a certificate at 50, 100 and 200 hours. And we're working actively with over 120 post-primary schools, and actually we're seeing increasing requests from primary schools, actually, that sort of upper end of the primary school, even because they're doing buddying and things in school, and they're doing eco schools and things like that, and they're giving opportunities for children to dip their toe in the water. And I actually think volunteering is a learned trait. I think if you started young, it can keep you going. It was brilliant. We had, I think, roughly 500 young people who did their Millennium Volunteer Award through the World Police and Fire Games. And I think that is a really good legacy from the Games. I think you're right. I think young people do need to volunteer to gain experience for their UCAS form, for job applications, and increasingly we're seeing even the universities engaging, whereas previously it would have been that you volunteered to get into university or college. Now you're having to volunteer throughout your university career, because otherwise when you come to look for a job you won't have the requisite experience. So I think it is something that young people are very active in and very aware of, and through our MV programme we are actively supporting schools and organisations working with young people to recognise that volunteering. And we're also looking at a piece of work to think about some of the softer skills that people are developing through that, so the communication, the confidence building, the team building. I mean, some of that is absolutely fundamental to any job you end up going into, and you may not have a piece of paper that shows you can be a good communicator, but your volunteering experience can help you to build towards that. So we're looking at that at the moment. So.
And we've actually reduced it down to 11 now. We're working with some schools with 11-year-olds, working on the basis that they can't get a Millennium Volunteer Award at that stage, but they can actually get the habit of volunteering, and then once they go through the system they can then become a Millennium Volunteer when they're 14. And I mean, last year there were 1,500 young people in Northern Ireland just in that 1 year who received their 200-hour certificate, and that was 300,000 hours of volunteer service. And that's fantastic in anybody's book, and those young people are really motivated. Like 200 hours, it takes them a year to do that, because they do have busy lives and they have to keep motivated. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and so my son has done it and just completed, but it gave them a bit of ownership in their community. You know what I mean? And to me, and I would never have looked at volunteering to do that before only that door was open. So thanks very much, and I'm totally amazed by the response that, particularly for the Workplace and Fire Games, and how it came straight back into the like of the Giro d'Italia and sporting events. It was really well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation this morning. Karen Ennis, Chair of the Scout Association. Can I just say to you, that just last night I got an email from a lady who has a child looking to become a member of the Scout Association, but the group the lady wants her son to go into has actually got a waiting list. There is a problem, certainly in the Scout Association, I think for all other sort of UK-wide uniformed organisations like BB, GB, Guides and so on, in some areas of waiting lists.
That's right.
Can I ask, have you been working, or could you work with those organisations, uniformed organisations, to try and have some of your volunteers go in and help allay, because there is a huge difficulty in terms of recruiting adult leaders within uniformed organisations, for example?
Okay, well, I mean, we actually did, and I agree, I mean, uniformed organisations, we did a piece of work with uniformed organisations recently in the last year looking at impact measurement of their contribution, and the results from that were fantastic in terms of the children, the parents, all of that. So they provide a very good service, and some of them are struggling. We do work with them in terms of advertising their opportunities and offering those opportunities out to the widest number of the population. And we also work with them in terms of looking at how this all goes back to why people tell us they don't volunteer. And why people tell us they don't volunteer often is a time factor, you know, they don't have enough time, and a fear of actually having to be overcommitted, you know, that and the worry about that. So we do work with organisations to see how can they package their volunteering opportunities that allows for a little flexibility. So immediately, because the thing about it is, it's in our experience, once you get people to volunteer and they really enjoy it, you can ask them almost to do on a weekly basis, because once they're engaged with you they will say yes. But sometimes what can put them off is the fact that they think they actually are going to have to be overcommitted, and they don't want to say yes to that immediately. So we do work with organisations to think at how they might repackage that, but we do work with the uniformed organisations quite closely in terms of their you know, advertising their opportunities to as wide as possible audience.
Thanks for that. Can I ask you, in relation to the piece of work that was done about the impact measurement, can I get a copy of that?
Yeah, no problem.
We will see. Now, we did it on behalf of the organisation, so it's not ours, but we put them in lots. We will do that with Sarah that you're interested in, and ask them to give you a copy.
Thank you.
It's very, very, very positive.
Cathal Washing.
Thank you, Chair. Chair declared, and this is Chair of the APG on the voluntary community sector. I have to say I do acknowledge, and we had it a couple of weeks ago here, a presentation from the Northwest 200 people, and without volunteers that event simply couldn't go ahead.
That's right.
Like there's 800 volunteers to take a part in that, and those efforts have to be acknowledged. But in recent years there has been difficulties with the Access NI process, and people have been waiting for 4 or 6 months longer even. How much of a disincentive to volunteering do you think those difficulties are, and have you addressed that, or have you looked into that aspect of it?
Obviously, it's not good if people have to wait, because I think volunteering is an immediate thing. People like to give their time and they want to do it now. As Wendy said, I think people are aware that the Access NI checks can be a prerequisite for some roles. I think one of the issues is that when the rules changed a few years ago, Access NI checks are not required for as many roles as were previously required. However, I'm not completely sure that all organisations have moved to stop checking. So I still think that the system is being gummed up by checks that may not always be completely required. And I think that is part of the issue here.
And for many people that are involved in multiple organisations or several organisations, then it requires a separate application every time. That has to put people off.
Yes.
It sometimes does put people off.
Yeah,
yes.
and it is time consuming and it's expensive, because I mean, as voluntary sector organisations we don't pay for Access NI checks, but statutory bodies in Northern Ireland do pay. So it is expensive. We are raising and have raised that repeatedly, and you know, obviously are keeping on top of that. But I do understand that there is hopefully light at the end of the tunnel about the portability of checks. So
Okay.
hopefully that
Yeah,
will
well, good luck with that.
happen soon.
Good luck with that.
Thank
Good
you.
Who eventually would make the decision about changing that?
In terms of
Meaning that people could
Portability.
transport their Access NI check across.
It'd be Access and I, it'd be Access and I and the departments, yes, it would
Department Health, I
be.
think.
I would decide that,
Yeah.
you know, they.
Thank you. Rosie McCorley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. And it's a very positive presentation this morning, so thank you for that. But in terms of Section 75 groups, what would be the biggest gap in the groups of, if you could categorise people who volunteer, and how would you go about accessing the groups who mightn't be represented, maybe not much or not at all? What would that be?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that particularly for Volunteer Now, sometimes people become fixated about the number of volunteers, and I think the number of volunteers is very important. But I also believe that that the volunteers should reflect the diversity of the population, and therefore you do want the widest diversity of people volunteering. And one of our key things would be to see that those who are underrepresented in that volunteering population actually get an opportunity. And we do work with 775 groups in order to be able to do that. And for instance, we're taking a piece of work forward at the moment with organisations looking at particularly at disability and seeing what we can do to encourage people with a disability to actually actively volunteer and to have access to volunteering opportunities. And on our website, we also show what opportunities have disabled access so that people can immediately see. But of course, there are other Section 75 groups than that we do reach out to. And one of the things we do is to work with organisations in relation to fact sheets, talking to them about involving volunteers from a wide variety and how they might do that. And Denise, you might want to say.
Yes, I'm just thinking the investing in volunteer standard, one of the things that we're encouraging groups to do is to monitor, because I think one of the issues is that there's a dearth of information really about which groups are underrepresented. So we do encourage groups to monitor their volunteering population and then to have a look at the NISRA information and see whether what they're having is appropriate. One of the issues with people with disabilities in particular is a concern around benefits, and people are concerned that if they volunteer they will lose their benefits. And I mean, this has been an age-old problem, and there's lots of information out. DSD have put information out to indicate that, you know, as long as they're maintaining the rules of the benefit and all the rest of it, there's no problem. But I think there is a concern that if you're claiming benefits, therefore you may be, you know, if you're saying, oh, I'm fit to volunteer, then I might be fit to do other things, and so there is a concern around that particular issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually you've hit an important point. There's people who would feel unable to volunteer because of the impact it might have, and yet it would probably be a very enriching experience, and it would probably help them. But I can understand that concern, so I suppose getting that message would be very important, and it would be important then, you know, reaching maybe other groups as well who don't seem to be well represented, who probably don't know much about it. And I think it would be good to actually maybe reach, you know, more maybe working class people and people from other ethnic minorities.
We've done a number of pieces of work with ethnic minority groups, particularly in Belfast, actually, over the last couple of years, and that's been great. And we've had a really good response from that. I think the disability issue is a challenge. We are doing a new piece of work at the moment with people with mental health, recovering from mental health problems, and I think you're absolutely right. For that group, volunteering could be a really positive thing. So we're starting, and that's a kind of dip your toe in the water thing. We're doing a number of action days, which I think will maybe break down some of those myths, and I think that can be really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's been very helpful, and I wish you well. There's been a lot of good work done there across those different events in terms of raising the profile of volunteering and highlighting there for the benefits that accrue from it, for not just for the organisation but for the people who are volunteers. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We're now going to have a briefing. Oh, sorry, first of all, members can tend just to leave that matter. There's no particular actions really that flow from. It's more for information, I think. If we could consider now the briefing from the Joint NI Environment Agency and National Museums NI Working Group. And if you turn to page 18 in the clerk's memo, the working group's briefing paper is at page 23, and the correspondence from the Environment Minister is at page 25. The research paper on archaeological archives from 2011 is at page 27, and the research paper summarising issues with archaeological issues from September 2013 is also included at page 65, and there's also a letter from the Minister that has been tabled which sets out her position on these issues. You do get an impression here of neither Minister in DOE or DCAL wanting to take full responsibility for the issue. Possibly an issue of finance may be in their minds when they take that particular view, but anyway, it's a matter to be worked through. So could we welcome... Oh, I'm right. They're on their way.
It was better to do it when they arrive, isn't it?
No, those chairs are very nice.
They rightly fail, those people.
You stand up.
I'll say that about you, William.
Good morning.
Good morning, and could I welcome to the meeting John O'Keefe there, who's the Principal Inspector in DOE, Jim McGreevy, who's the Director of Collections and Interpretation at National Museums Northern Ireland, and Sinead McCartan, who's Head of Collections, Research and Interpretation for NMNI, and Jude Helliker from NMNI sends her apologies. Could I invite the officials to make an opening statement? The purpose of the session really is to bring members up to date on where the work of the working group stands. And it's not a case of us going through rehearsing all of the arguments again, but we'll have an opportunity for greater committee discussion at a later date. But it's really to get an update from the officials today, and we thank them for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing the introductions as well, and for the opportunity to provide this briefing to the committee. The committee has received a briefing note from National Museums Northern Ireland and letters from Ministers Durkan and Nacullin. And hopefully these complement each other in terms of conveying to the committee a sense of how things stand currently at a high level. I'd like to use the NMNI briefing note as a basis for a short presentation, and point out at the beginning that the note touches on both the findings of the working group thus far and on the current position of National Museums Northern Ireland in these circumstances. The group recognised the very valuable work that Dr. Dan Hull had undertaken in 2011, really a catalyst for a lot of the subsequent considerations. This provided an overview of the situation, and building on this, the group has sought to bring some more definition to the various issues that are arising. The starting point for the group's work was work undertaken by NIEA with and through the Federation of Archaeological Managers and Employers, FAME. And that work was essentially an information gathering exercise as a pointer towards addressing the issues identifying the issues that need to be addressed. I say an information gathering exercise, but it was quite an extensive and wide-ranging information gathering exercise. The work did not set out to establish the quantum of material involved. So the figure that Dr. Hull has posited of 1.47 million is still the working group's working assumption as to the scale of the problem. And on that point, I'd like, if I may, to reiterate what was said in the National Museum's briefing note, and really just to give a sense to the committee of what this actually means in terms of scale. 1.47 million objects is of a similar order of magnitude to the entire collection of National Museums Northern Ireland, not just archaeology. And on archaeology, it's roughly 5 times what National Museums Northern Ireland currently holds. So hopefully that'll give you a sense of what 1.47 million objects actually means in terms of what's held in public collections already. It's significant. Similar comparisons can also be drawn in relation to the digital archives, the paper archives, photographic archives and so on that accompany the objects themselves. So the scale of what we're trying to address is considerable. The working group considered a range of issues which arise in relation to what they identified as 1,825 archives that are currently out there geographically dispersed, and these are the individual archives relating to individual excavations that have taken place over quite a long time period in the past. I think it's important to emphasise that these archives are the archives that are currently held by private archaeological companies. The working group has become aware that there is other material being held within the public sector as a result of publicly driven developments in recent years. The main issues that the working group have identified and that will need to be tackled are, and this is very headline, is the issue of legal title to the archives, to the material, i.e. ownership. In law, the landowner on whose land the material has been excavated is the owner of that material. So that is a major issue that spans all of these archives and all of this material. Another big issue is the application of what we would call retention and disposal criteria, i.e. how much of this 1.47 million these 1.47 million objects are actually worthy of long-term preservation in terms of their intrinsic value and so on. It's highly unlikely that any consideration has been given at this stage to that very fundamental question that will need to be addressed. Other issues that the working group has identified are areas such as assessment of conservation requirements. There is a lot of uncertainty about the condition of this material and what the conservation requirements would be going forward to ensure long-term preservation. And not just long-term preservation, but of course it's not preservation as an end in itself, it's preservation with a view to delivering public benefit well into the future. The absence of documentation of this material to what we would call a museum standard. Lack of standardisation in approaches to documentation of the material and record keeping by companies, lack of standardisation in storage containers and so on. This material, as I've already said, is geographically dispersed, but the way in which it's stored is highly variable and certainly wouldn't be of a standard that we would like to see applied in a museum context. The work that is required to drill down into each of these aspects and more, but they're the main issues, is likely to be significant in terms of the resource required. And the working group is currently considering a framework whereby the work might be undertaken. That would be part of a report to be submitted to, in National Museum's case, my board of trustees, and of course to DCAL and DOE ministers in due course. If I could say something, given that the Department of Environment, the respective ministers have stated their position, if I may, just to reiterate National Museum's position. Our approach to collecting is one of what I would call managed collecting, i.e. decisions on collecting take into account the consequences of bringing something into the collection. Usually, and certainly over the last 15 to 20 years, in National Museum's terms, what that means is bringing in single objects or small groups of objects. And in those cases, issues such as the title to the object, the conservation requirements, the storage requirements, the documentation requirements, i.e. the broad range of resource requirements, as well as its potential use for public benefit, are all mapped out and considered prior to taking a decision on acquisition. Probably the biggest example I can give you of an acquisition that is at a scale higher than that is an acquisition that we brought in at the end of 2010 relating to the White Star Line, and which DCAL generously supported. That comprised something in the region of 4,500 to 5,000 objects. Now, we established that it was worthy of retention. We established that its storage conditions could be addressed, its conservation requirements could be addressed, and indeed we could use it demonstrably so for public benefit. And of course we also established that the person who was offering it to us legally owned it. Now that took quite some time. What the acquisition was conditional on was the vendor providing us with a full catalogue of the material, because we did not want to inherit a documentation backlog. So that gives you a sense of the type of approach that National Museums takes to acquisitions. It's relatively straightforward with small groups of objects, but even something like 4,500 to 5,000 objects, it's quite a rigorous process, and a lot of deliberation has gone into it. And if I could just remind you that the quantum of material that we're looking at potentially is 1.47 million in regard to archaeological material. So in these circumstances, the Board of Trustees' position is that it cannot accept material into the collection. Acceptance would certainly be dependent on conditions that our current resources can't meet, and indeed are unlikely to be able to meet for the foreseeable future. This is a position that's consistent, it's not a National Museums position, it's a position that's consistent within the museum sector, within codes of ethics, and indeed within the Northern Ireland Museums policy. However, what I would like to stress is that National Museums would like to continue to work with DOE, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and indeed others in an advisory capacity towards developing solutions to this quite major problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other contribution, or do you want to take questions at this stage?
I think, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Can I ask just first of all, and we have a visit planned to it in, I think it's January. First meeting in January. The Heron Road Resource Facility for National Museums. Is that site fit for purpose? If not, what would be the requirements for an archive storage facility? And have you identified any alternative sites? And we were down at Swords and saw what they have there in a building. And I can't get my head around 1.5 million objects. What?
Neither can we.
That's a relief.
Sorry.
Not the only one then. If you were to put that, what sort of space would it require?
If I could talk about Heron Road first of all. Heron Road houses essentially the collections of the Ulster Museum. They were moved out of the Ulster Museum prior to redevelopment over 2006 to 2009. It houses those collections in their entirety, and I did make reference earlier to the fact that about roughly a fifth of those holdings are archaeology. So it's quite the collections themselves are quite diverse in terms of their nature, in terms of the storage requirements and so on. But currently they are, it is just about fit for purpose in terms of being able to accommodate those collections absolutely safely and absolutely securely, in terms of security systems, in terms of environmental controls and so on. So long-term preservation of the material that's there is under constant review and currently insured. It doesn't have capacity for any additions. there is no capacity for additional material. That's just the Ulster Museum. Bear in mind that National Museums also has responsibility for the collections at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum and the Ulster American Folk Park. So we have quite a dispersed storage estate. The other point that I would make on Heron Road is that National Museum's aspiration would be to develop approaches towards greater public access to collections. And when Heron Road was taken on as a storage facility, it was very much for the purpose of long-term security and safety, not for public access. And the challenge for us at the moment is not just to consider possible additions to the collections, but also to develop ways in which we can provide access to collections which we currently have. On the Swords facility, again, Swords holds the National Museum of Ireland collections in their entirety, and the archaeological collections are but one part of it. My understanding is that that's on a rental basis. I don't know what the National Museum of Ireland's long-term plans are in that regard. But I do know that they are also, like us, looking at the whole question of public access.
I think their intention or hope was to purchase.
Yes, which is what National Museum of Northern Ireland has done.
Right. So Heron Road is in your ownership.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Gentlemen, I'm fairly new to the committee, so I'm not sort of shy about asking any question at all. But I was intrigued by the museum policy quoted here in the report which we have from March 2011, with sort of words like, it does contain intentions to improve and also establish clear priorities for development of these sort of artefacts. What actually is happening on the ground in reality on this particular area?
You're referring to the Northern Ireland Museums policy? Well, intentions to improve and develop collections. Obviously, certainly, I think in the context of the policy, which is addressed to the entire museum sector within Northern Ireland, that is looking at, I think that was signalling particularly gaps in the collections currently identified within the sector, and how those gaps might be addressed. I think it also had an eye on what we would call contemporary collecting, i.e. capturing recent history. And making sure that there is no duplication of effort, that there is a coordinated approach across the sector, which is a point I think that permeates this policy, that it's the entire sector looking at these particular issues. In terms of National Museums Northern Ireland, the approach we have to developing the collections is a very targeted one, and increasingly our starting points are the public domain and public benefit, and particularly government agendas. So, for example, one of our areas in recent years has been seeking to address and contribute to the Decade of Centenaries programmes through exhibitions on the Covenant, our history galleries, and so on. So it's very much targeted rather than being comprehensive and open-ended.
Well, how then, following on, because it's all the one sentence, how have the standards of collection care in Northern Ireland been improved since 2011?
Standards of National Museums collections?
So that's what this says, yeah.
Yes.
They contain intentions to improve the standards of collections care in Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Well, I can only speak on behalf of National Museums Northern Ireland, and we've already discussed the Heron Road facility, and that was a major step forward.
Is that sort of post-2011?
We have undertaken further improvements at Heron Road post-2011, but the major improvements were effected in 2006-2007 in advance of the move of collections from the
So what improvements have been to the collections in private hands, if any?
I can't answer that question. That's not a responsibility that National Museums Northern Ireland can address.
Seems to me that it's nobody's responsibility here. That's part of the problem.
I think that is part of the problem.
Not too
yes.
simple.
No, but I think it's everyone's responsibility and no one's responsibility.
And for final point, Chair,
summary.
where are all the artefacts that were dug up as a result of public authority working, particularly the government working, on roads, various developments across the place, public works? Where are all those bits and pieces?
John, could you
Yes, yeah.
Gives you a chance to come in.
Oh, that's okay. It covers, I think that the point that you've just raised there touches probably on the nub of the question about who is responsible, where are the objects now, and what will happen to them in the longer term. I'm aware from discussion with colleagues in other departments that organisations like Road Service are currently trying to group the material they have into single places of storage. But to try to put that into perspective in terms of size and the physical scale of this, in the report that we commissioned into trying to put an identification on the physical volume, we're looking at somewhere in the order of 700 cubic metres of material. But that just talks about a physical volume. Depending on how you work that out, you're looking at something in the order of around about 26 large shipping containers, or somewhere in the order of about 4 to 5 times this physical room, going from floor to ceiling of storage. Now, that just simply compresses everything down into a single volume. That doesn't include things like public access, ongoing conservation needs, or any of those things. And if for members that were at the Swords facility, you'll see the distinction between grouping everything together and putting it all into a tight box and ramming down the lid, and the storage conditions that are required for the safe storage on shelving for the floor area. So it's, first of all, it's a very large physical volume. The issue about where the material goes to after the excavation has been completed and the analysis has been completed hasn't been resolved. In a professional context, the Institute Field Archaeologists operates primarily within GB but operates across the UK, and then the Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland would talk about a final destination for the material, that as the archive is formed coming out of the ground, it'll have somewhere to go to in the end. But the example in the Republic of Ireland is very different compared to Northern Ireland, in that in the Republic the state asserts its ownership of the material. So there's no question of, is it for the museums, is it for the Department of the Environment, is it for somebody else? There's a very clear identified owner, and as part of that clear identified owner, this long-term storage has been resolved, or is in the process of being resolved. It's not quite full of all of its material yet. Also, in terms of the work in the working group, we've recognised that the skills that are required to deal with that material aren't always going to be the same as the skills required to dig it out of the ground in the first place, or the skills are required to repoint the walls of Carrick Castle or any other monument. There's a discrete skill set required behind that. So again, for those public authorities who have acquired the material, we are not aware of any other part of the Northern Ireland Civil Service that employs curators to maintain archaeological collections that have arisen from mitigation works or investigation works. Road Service would be one of the largest public bodies that deals with mitigation works that create part of the archive. It does affect others like Department of Enterprise, Trade and Investment, where we look at some of the large Invest NI sites and so on, which have generated some very significant and important collections in those works. So, in a way, the answer to the question is we don't know where all of the material is, but we know where some is being held by public bodies, but the vast majority of it is still being retained by the companies that were commissioned to conduct the excavation work itself. That material isn't being held within accredited museum-type institutions, so the regulation of storage conditions or the improvement of storage conditions falls outside of the statutory remit, really, of both departments.
Thank you. Cathal.
Well, thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks, for that. The archives and artefacts that we're talking about here, regardless of whether they're found north or south, the Swords facility is very good. We had a visit to it not that long ago. How much change in legislation would be required for artefacts found in the north to be transferred to the south for storage purposes in the short term, because it seems to me that the situation here really is unbearable. Nobody has any idea what we have, where it is, and if companies go into liquidation, it can be disposed of at a whim.
I don't think, and I would stand to be corrected here, I don't think that legislation is an issue. There are mechanisms for, there is a mechanism for moving cultural material between jurisdictions, an export license framework, which would permit the transfer of material from here to the south. That's correct. It's not a legislative issue. But I would actually go way beyond that, because in my own mind, what I think we can't lose sight of is the public benefit dimension that we want to try to capture and deliver in relation to this material. And it's difficult to conceive of as to how public benefit for people here could be delivered if material is 100 miles away from here. It's not just that. I think there are a number of other issues in relation to the material itself. I think in terms of cost, because undoubtedly there would be a cost. My understanding of the Swords facility is that it's quite a high specification in terms of the storage conditions that are offered. I would suggest that the bulk of this material does not require that high specification because of its nature. So there would be probably quite a large and unnecessary cost to the public purse by so doing. But that, I think, only takes us so far, because corralling it, if I can use that term, is really just the first step. The other issues that I referred to earlier on, such as assessing it, documenting it, the conservation requirements and so on, they would, of course, also have to be done 100 miles away from here, which I think logistically and practically would present quite serious problems.
Yeah, but the problem is that all the material that we have, it's really, other than the figure of what 1.47 million, you know, it is unquantifiable, the nature and type and the requirements. So you talk about Swords being high spec in terms of its state of preservation and storage and what have you. It's just that the public benefits that seems to. You know, what public benefit have we now when we don't know what's there, what it is?
No, I accept that is the case, but our aspiration would be to develop and deliver public benefits on a number of strands. I'm not sure if.
May I, Chair?
Sure. Yes.
The National Museum, just like National Museums Northern Ireland, has quite strict guidelines about what it brings into its collections. So they're in a very good position in terms of they can issue those guidelines to excavators in advance because they know where it's all going to go, as Swords is seen as the national repository. So they have advice notes that they issue, and I know from speaking with colleagues in Dublin, what they do is assess in quite a lot of detail in advance each and every individual archive to ensure that it is up to spec before it's brought into Swords. Now, the material, the 1,825 archives that we know are in that have come from excavations in Northern Ireland, that National Museum standard has not been, National Museum of Ireland standard hasn't been applied to those archives. And that in itself would present an issue.
Yeah, it just seems to me that there should be a freer flow of national archives north and south. I know that, I know it's high profile, but it took 9 years to get the return of the Browder Torc, Browder Hoard back to Limavady and Derry, and it was only came because, well, I first worked on it back in 2005, so it took us 9 years before it came home as such, and I know it was subject to a very famous court case way back at the start of the other century, but you know, this stuff, I think there's a piece of work to be done there to look at that more freer movement of archives.
Certainly,
Sorry.
Sorry, John.
Well, it's a relevant point that comes with this again in terms of the material. It is important to note we know what sites were excavated, we know by whom they were excavated, and we do have reports that the Department of the Environment would take in satisfaction of licence requirements about what was found, and for the large proportion of licences issued, those reports have been achieved. Where we will hit for whatever institution, north, south, east or west or any other, and was a point that was made down in Swords, is the material needs to be ready for the archive. This material, as it was generated from the ground, was not generated, as far as we can determine at this stage, with this long-term archiving in plan. And where we would certainly see concerns, problems, I don't know what's the best descriptor for that, is that for the Museum Authority in the South, they own the material that's there and can insist on it being brought in a certain Now, through negotiation or discussion, I'm sure there's a way of finding out how this material could be accessioned to whatever body that would be. Of the material that's there at present, it's who would pay to bring it to that standard, who would pay to bring it to the deposition standard, and then ultimately who is the owner of that material at that point in time. Because if it's come from Northern Ireland, there's the issue of jurisdictional responsibility. Within Northern Ireland, the owners may or may not be identifiable. I wouldn't anticipate that anybody is seeking to have the material returned to them if they were developing a site. It's an issue that we'd like to see move away on. So those are certainly there. Any transport of material between jurisdictions is subject to some licensing requirements, which would fall back again to the Arts Council in England for the transfer of material across the border. So there are administrative mechanisms that need to be followed through. There's the export from the UK and export into the Republic. For material coming backward and forward, again, there's other administrative elements that exist within that.
So the Arts Council in England issue the licences required for movements within Ireland.
Yeah.
Can I also just say that the movement of cultural material between here and a number of institutions, and I mean two-way movement, that's a regular feature of our business. Where we regularly borrow and lend material from the collections to institutions down south.
I think it's worth bearing in mind that when we were down at Swords, it was pointed out that with their aspiration, the entire capacity of the place will be required for what they have in the way of artefacts or will have in the Irish Republic. So I think the idea of lodging with them is not a particularly practical one. But I'm glad to know that the broider hoard came back, so William can now start on the recovery of the Shankill Crozier. We'll start reclaiming all of the artefacts that are now south of the border and bring them back to Northern Ireland. I think that's an excellent proposal. Rosie McCorley.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering what you really feel about the lack of movement, really, and our lack of sort of real interest, because it could appear like that for somebody looking in, that nobody seems to be really care that much because there's all sorts of obstacles. How does it feel for you as professionals, and what do you think is the greatest obstacle that prevents movement forward?
I think, I mean, one of the very positive aspects of the working group is that it provides a mechanism for professionals from different organisations to share their expertise and their thinking and their skills. So it's cross-cutting across departments, and I think that's a very positive thing. But obviously, and I think possibly this is what lies behind your question, the working group can only take matters so far. It has made a considerable effort to identify the salient issues, but it can only take it so far. What the working group certainly recognises, because we deal with it on a daily basis, are the resource issues that this issue throws up. We currently face within our respective organisations resource issues in this particular area as well as others. And we're very, very mindful of the budget situation going forward. So whilst the extent to which the working group can shape and direct the next steps, as it were, is limited, but but nonetheless I hope will be helpful. The group does recognise that there are major resource issues and that is a concern for all parties, actual and potential.
So, in terms of the report and recommendations, how optimistic would you be about anything really positive coming out of that?
Well, I think
not the wording of the report, I mean action coming out of the recommendations.
I think one of the benefits of the report that it will flag up the issues, and in the same way as Dr. Hull's report acted as a catalyst for consideration. I think this is yet a further move in the direction. So I think the working group is heartened by the opportunity to actually bring these issues to a higher level. As for how optimistic, I think the group has to be realistic about what the prospects are. And we're currently, or the group rather, is currently looking at possibly a phased approach to addressing this, because I think one of the big concerns is that people are looking at the end point, which could be a number of years away, and I think there's some hesitancy about accepting responsibility for that end point, and perhaps a more incremental approach might help move things forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. I also sit on the Derry Committee, and just the other day we had the Derry Minister in front of the committee. He was talking about the importance of tourism to the Northern Ireland economy. You'll be well aware of the importance, and particularly when we have an economic downturn, and tourism can be hugely important in terms of bringing in inward investment and creating employment, generating wealth. So, Jim, in terms of your answer, you said you had an aspiration in terms of the public benefit. When will that aspiration be delivered, do you think?
Well, the previous question talked about going forward. My own take on the situation is that an incremental approach is possibly a sensible approach at this stage. Public benefit, actually, certainly in National Museums terms, public benefit can be delivered at a number of different levels. The main mechanism that the museums has of doing that are through its exhibitions and community engagement programs. But there is also within the public domain is the academic world and the universities who are partners with us in that. So what I meant about public benefit is that as the group goes forward, or whoever takes this whole issue forward, the whole issue of public benefit mustn't be lost sight of. That opportunities to deliver public benefit should be identified at every stage in the process.
Okay. Well, okay. Thanks for that, but I'm not really sure you've answered that. In terms of the incremental benefit and going forward, the progress, you say whoever takes it forward, is there a doubt who's going to take it forward?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of doubt. I think a number of parties, if I can use that term, will be responsible for resolving the various issues. The degree to which they're going to be involved will depend on where we are at any particular stage in the process. But there are already within the cultural infrastructure, if I can use that term, within Northern Ireland, and that's not just the museum sector, but also the heritage sector under environment. There's already an infrastructure there which would allow us to use this material as it becomes clear about what it is, how significant it is, what its relevance is, and so on, in myriad ways.
So in terms of the incremental development going forward, though, the progression, what are the steps that you think? When are we going to see the first steps of this incremental development?
Well, I think in terms of the letters that the two respective ministers have offered to the chair, their position has been made quite clear in terms of where they are with this issue of the archaeological archives. Maybe just to step back a little bit from it, though. In terms of the economic value of the historic environment in Northern Ireland, the report that was commissioned, I think 2 years ago now, had identified a value of somewhere in the order of 500 million gross per year. Now that embraces everything from the castles and the standing stones through to attendance of museums, visiting the historic churches, all of those. But and the support network around that, the tour guides, coffee shops, overnight stays and so on. Now there's obviously a huge overlap between the tourism sector and that heritage sector. There's also a very big overlap between the trade skills sector and the heritage sector, a very big overlap in education and a whole series of other places. At the moment, though, we're dealing with parts of the problem and taking these forward. So as a complete entity in dealing with the excavation archive that's come from these development-led excavations, there's a whole host of potentials, be that from those who are very interested in detailed archaeology and science in that particular category, right the way through to those who have a passing or limited interest in archaeology, and the skills that are required across the board. So be that construction skills, analytical thinking, participation, community involvement, all of those that sit with it. But longer term, I think it's quite clear in terms of the two letters that were brought to, there isn't an identified owner to take this forward. So achieving, there isn't an identified single vehicle, single owner to take this forward.
Yes, and that's, you see, that's for me the nub of it, because I have listened to both of you answer questions. I asked a specific question. There's no mechanism to take it forward. And I've asked for even the first step in this incremental development going forward, and I haven't had an answer from either of you. So there's no mechanism to take it forward, and you don't really know when it's going to start to go forward. In fact, we haven't even got an answer as to when the first step's going to be.
I think the key point here is this is on the tables of two ministers.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue there is the one that's been flagged up, money. And neither minister wants probably to put their hand up and say, I'm going to find the money for this. Mm-hmm. That's the core of the issue. And I think we need to be looking here with the Environment Committee in due course at what can be done to bring the two ministers to some sort of understanding as to where the responsibility for this lies and who should be prioritising it, because it is a hugely important matter. What priority do the two ministers, each of them, give to this? What priority do they place on it? Where do they put it in their list of priorities? We've heard of things that are inescapable commitments, things that are not inescapable. So we need to find out, are they serious about this and face up to it? So I think today we're getting the information from officials, and it helps to clarify the situation. But as was said there in Sean's last comment, it's down to the two letters from the two ministers.
Yeah, yes. and I don't want you to, I mean, I'm not being critical of you guys, but it's our job to, but clearly, we have to, and you're giving us answers, but the mechanism's clear there, are not clear there to how to get us to the point that you want to get to and we want to get to. Just a couple of other quick questions. You have 1.8 million objects in stock, as it were. 23% of those are of international significance. Now, cultural tourism is, I think somewhere approaching 55% of tourists are cultural tourists. So that's hugely important to Northern Ireland's diaspora, whether United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all these huge world powers that we help shape and mould as countries. Are we making enough of those 23% of that have international significance? For the meeting in January.
Again, from a National Museum's perspective, I would make a similar comment to the comment I made earlier about North-South. National Museum's collections, or parts of the collections, do travel the globe. And in recent years have...
No, sorry, let me stop you there.
Sorry.
Maybe I didn't make it clear. I'm talking about how we can, and if there's money comes of that, and I hope there is, that's good. Or maybe there's just an agreement that things are shared around the world. What I'm talking about is cultural tourists coming to Northern Ireland. Are we making, of those 23% of artefacts that you have that are of international significance, is the term used, are we making the most of those to attract tourists to come here, to retain them when they do come here, and draw the maximum amount out of them when they do come here?
I think I'll try and best answer that. It's a very complex question, and it's a very good point. There are two areas in which I would throw up as examples in terms of how National Museums engages internationally, but through its facilities. One, the most obvious one, is the Ulster American Folk Park, which has a strong North American dimension and has, over the years, has developed very strong links and very positive and supportive links. The other most recent example, I think it depends a lot on the extent to which the story of this place has an international relevance or interest, is the Titanic programme that National Museums developed in 2011 and is still ongoing. And by that I mean particularly the Titanic exhibition at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, which has garnered a huge amount of both local interest and international interest.
Yeah, but I think it was the First Minister who, when I was in the DFM committee, came to the committee and said Titanic as a brand is known much better and widely, more readily identified in the world than the term Northern Ireland, the term Republic of Ireland or Irish Republic, whatever. And so, that's something which we should be exploiting more and more and more. And perhaps we'll return to this whenever we visit, Chair, because I think it's something that I would want to pursue with you. Finally, can I ask you, in terms of a joined upness around tourism, I think you have a key role, both of your organisations, John, and museums, in this, because take, for example, Carrickfergus Castle. Research suggests that, take Americans, a lot of Americans coming to the UK, they're interested in gardens and castles, and those are the two of the main things they're interested in. Are we sufficiently joined up in terms of the tourism product and sort of selling Carrickfergus Castle? As a Norman castle, aren't too many of them about the place. In terms of the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, Ulster Museums, National Museums, the Tourist Board and Carrickfergus Council are regional council partnerships, tourism partnerships. Are we joined up enough?
I think the very simple answer is no. There's work that we could do with those, and a lot of work that we have already been doing, but it's not quite hitting the mark yet.
So who takes the lead now, John? Because this is absolutely crucial.
Well, I think that if you take, in the case of, say, Carrick Castle, the Department of Environment is the guardian of the site. The local authority is responsible for an awful lot of the activity within the town of Carrickfergus, and the ideal at a place like Carrickfergus is you come to the castle and Carrickfergus, that it was simply a question of parking in the car park, taking a photograph and driving off. You could do that online. The overlap with the Tourist Board, we have already taken on an awful lot more connections with the Tourist Board and the joint marketing, the joint presentation of events, so that they're, rather than having multiple points of access to these activities, that if you go onto the NI Direct website or onto the Tourist Board's website, you're not being redirected 5 or 15 times, but you should have a single portal that you come into to find out about that information. But there is more work to be done with that, and we'll be meeting representatives from my own.
Sorry to interrupt you, but when you say should have we got it? That portal?
On the portal?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the Discover Northern Ireland website and the tourism website, I think, has improved a lot. There's, like with any of these, they could be developed further, but I think that it is much better than it was before. And at that point of contact, we would share our events catalogue with the Tourist Board for it to be uploaded onto their website. So that for the tourist, by and large, is not going to think, I want to visit a cultural site in Northern Ireland, I better go to the Department of the Environment. There's too much of a space between the two concepts in a lot of people's minds. But if you were to type in on the search engine Carrickfergus Castle visiting, and you would hope that that's taking you to a principal visitor hub, and that's where the Discover Northern Ireland.
And obviously councils have responsibility to promote the tourism package in their borough.
They will, and that's work that we need to develop further. Bearing in mind the resource pressures that we do have, but it is work that we need to take further, and that the length of opening hours at the castles, the scope of activities, and
could I come in on that? In that we are looking at archaeological archives, I think the important thing that William's getting at there is this: that culture and cultural heritage are hugely important to Northern Ireland. Cultural traditions and cultural heritage play out here in a whole range of ways. Some good, sometimes not so good. But we have huge opportunities in terms of contributing towards building a shared and better future in Northern Ireland through better mutual understanding of different cultural traditions. And Tino's for it. I always like that old group of 3 words that I think it was the Community Relations Council used: equality, diversity and interdependence. And if that's our vision for Northern Ireland, then the cultural diversity in that middle bit is hugely important. And then secondly, the whole sense of belonging and people's sense of who they are. Again, if people are at peace with themselves and at peace with each other, cultural heritage, I think, has a role to play in that. And thirdly, then, the economic driver, the tourism, the whole Ulster diaspora to North America, to Canada, or Australia, New Zealand, and so on. There's markets there that can be tapped into. And I think that as a committee, a number of people have an interest there in maximising the benefits that accrue to Northern Ireland in all of those different areas. And it's something I think probably as a committee we'll want to take a look at. And the visit at the beginning of January is an example of that. And just throw this as an example. A few years ago, there was a new copy of the American Declaration of Independence discovered in London, in archives. And American visitors coming to Belfast could have had the opportunity of seeing an original first print American Declaration of Independence copy, whether it be in the Titanic Centre or the Ulster Museum. I'm not going to argue about where it should be. I prefer the Ulster Museum, but I think that's where it should be. Because the chance of them actually seeing one in America, there's so few in America, such a big place. And we got it here, I think, maybe for a while, or there was a talk about coming here for a while, but it should have been here as a permanent exhibit. We should have been laying claim to that. It was, it's something that was printed first by an Ulster man. It was first written in the handwriting of an Ulsterman. Ulster thinking was behind it, with a Scottish Enlightenment. All of those things. We should have these things here and be playing up Ulster's importance, not playing it down. So I think that's something we'll want to come back to, William, and I know that both John and Jim and Sinead will have a role to play in contributing to that discussion.
And just finally, what's going to say was I accept absolutely the budgetary pressures that you're under, John, but those do provide an opportunity at the same time where there can be economies of scale if the council, national museums, yourselves, tourist board and so on are working collectively on a joined up approach. It can actually mean there can be savings rather than duplication and wastage. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for the what was a thought-provoking and extended discussion.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
We should do something. Because
No.
big monuments to him.
That's a fair point.
Actually, with the American national anthem, a lot of American tourism would be able to.
John McCann.
Yes, so.
Had tea in his house.
Good man.
No.
He's a good fella. Different spelling.
Yes, he spells it the right way.
CAV.
Oh, does he?
I don't know what the right way is. So I don't be writing this down. No.
Put it right.
I had tea in his face.
Right. Well, two things here. First of all, seek members' agreement to forward the papers from the briefing to the Environment Committee, because it does extend across the two domains, and it is an issue that really is on the tables of two ministers. And remind members, the committee is due to visit the Ulster Museum on the 8th of January. Will be briefed by representatives from Swords before visiting the museum storage centre at Heron Road, and that's expected to be a joint visit with the Environment Committee. Thank you. Brings us on then to our inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities, and we're getting a briefing today from Cultureland and referring members to the Clark's memo at page 73 and the Cultureland briefing paper at page 79. This briefing will contribute to the committee inquiry. It will be covered by Hansard. I'll clear my desk here. Thank you very much indeed for coming along this morning to Emer and Aisling. Emer's the director and Aisling's the project coordinator. Could I thank you for coming and invite you to make an opening statement?
Just cúpla duine John ar Lord Bishop Berla lo riamh ach tá chun seo dhéanamh Merle. Just there's a few people here I've never spoken to in English before, so just we've just decided to do this through English, so can all understand. So basically, just on the subject of inclusion of the working classes in the arts, we propose to tell you about Cultureland a bit, what we're doing, how we're engaging with people, and what we feel, I suppose, that would help us to do it. Cultureland is an arts and cultural centre dedicated to the promotion of Irish language arts, based in a Presbyterian church building on the Falls Road since 1991. And we have produce a complete range of arts events catering for all ages and interests, with the mission of promoting the Irish language through the arts and the arts through the Irish language. So Irish is the working language of the building and the offices. So we try and provide a good service to people who are speakers of the language and who are trying to learn at whatever level they're at, but also to give a welcoming flavour of Irish culture and language to the increasing numbers of tourists and visitors to the centre. And really it's about normalising the language in the wider society, assimilating it into life and increasing participation and accessibility. So we have the Art Centre, which comprises of, we have a theatre, we have gallery spaces, workshop spaces, shop, tourist information point, bookshop, cafe, restaurant, and also rooms that we would let out to other people as well. And we have a number of creative industries, I suppose, based in the building, a couple of television production companies, a lifestyle magazine, design company, etc. So it's really about kind of creating that hub where people who are either part of the Irish language community or interested in it in any way can feel at home and be accommodated. We have a number of different funders, main funders, Arts Council, Forest na Gaeilge, Belfast City Council, etc. We've 9 staff, and then we would bring in a lot of other people to teach classes, etc. Offer certain amount of placements. So we cover drama, music, dance, visual arts. We have a lot of regular activities, workshops, classes. We have about 300 people attending classes on a weekly basis. We, as well as our own events, we would also be a venue for a lot of other festivals and that around the city. So Féile Phobal, Féile Airí, Young at Arts Festival, Belfast Film Festival, Seachtain na Gaeilge, Community Relations Week, Positive Ageing Week. There's a new festival, the Science Festival, in the spring. We hope to be part of that as well. So really, if it's on, we try and be part of it, and we try and bring along again, normalise the language, and have events for our community as well. Obviously, we're situated in an area that is suffers from high levels of disadvantage, high levels of intergenerational unemployment, and deeply affected both in terms of lack of investment and with historically from the Troubles. And I think it has been the success of Culturland really is that we have reacted to the needs of the community and tried to provide. I mean, we do see ourselves very much as a community arts organisation. We are rooted in the community, and we reach out as much as we possibly can. And we do a lot of things to encourage access, such as, I mean, our ticket pricing would be very reasonable anyhow, would be reasonable compared to anywhere else in Belfast. But we would also provide free ticketing in that for various events, for local community, for groups that use it, and just to draw people in as much as possible. And we would also pass people on from our attendance at our centres to other events around the city. We've sent some people to the Bolshoi recently, or we are sending. Also, we have an arrangement with the Strand Cinema that some of our senior citizens are going to be able to go and visit that. So things like that, just to encourage people to be part of it.
We do a lot of partnership work with the other organisations throughout Belfast as well, particularly arts organisations or community groups and community centres.
And one of the recent new events we've started actually is a choir for elderly people or people who are maybe with onset dementia. We've done that in partnership with the Montague Centre beside us. So that has been actually an amazing bit of outreach work that was on our doorstep. And once you start it and you see the difference that it makes to people's lives, I think it's been very kind of humbling for all of us actually. People who don't get out, like a man whose wife had died a few years ago and hadn't really been leaving the house since. And it's just, something that gives somebody an opportunity to get out and to mix with other people. It's just so vitally important. So kind of try to be very cognizant of things like that and what the opportunities are out around us. I suppose also the cafe and the bookshop and those services that are on the ground floor are great enablers to get people in and to make it easy for people to come in and access. And once you're in the cafe, then if you look to the left, there's an art gallery, and if you go in there, you go upstairs, there's another one. And the building is pretty much designed to lead people around it and to engage them as well. Regular activities are for, start really from song and movement for not to 5-year-olds and go up to, then we have various classes for, as I say, third age people. We also have art competitions for schools on an annual basis. We have school gallery visits, which are really important in stretching out to the local communities. We have an Irish dancing school coming in using the building. Local theatre groups as well. We have a resident theatre company within the building, but also other groups that will use it. I mean, basically, if we're not using the building, then we try and make sure that other people are. Music and language classes, traditional choir, women's choir, the choir for elderly people, open music sessions as well. In 2011, we opened an extension to the building with a cocktail of funders, and a condition of funding from the International Fund for Ireland was that we should employ a good relations officer. And that post lasted till the end of 2013. That was Aisling's post. And there was a big learning in that really, because up until then we knew that we could do more outreach work. But I wouldn't really have imagined how much more we could do and how much more effective we could have been when we had somebody to actually dedicate to the role. Because, we don't have a big staff. We are all flat out doing what we do. But having somebody whose job it is to go out and to bring people in was massively, massively important to us. And because of Aisling, the Townsend Street Festival started, which is a cross-community festival, but also working with the most deprived postcodes. Many schools, the Presbyterian Church, Edenderry Primary, Malvern, Brown Square, Finn Square, so many groups are part of that, and it's been really successful. This year was its 4th year, I think.
Yeah, it's also part of the outreach for that is that we work with residents' associations. Often I find with arts organisations that when they're saying they work with a community group, they're working with a paid community worker who doesn't live in the area, whereas we were really trying to target people who lived right beside where the festival was going to be. And we also looked, it's called a festival, but it's actually a street party. And the reason why we chose a street party, because it's sort of deeply set in working class culture to have street parties. And a lot of the times when we look at trying to engage with people in the arts, you're looking at something outside of what they're used to. So we were trying to do something that people were used to, just bring it to another level.
Other projects that came out of that was cultural connections between Windsor Women's Centre and the 174 Trust. Obviously at the time 174 was building the Duncairn Cultural Centre, so there was an automatic link there. But there was some great art projects part of that as well. Again, drawing people into areas that they hadn't been into before. And as organisations working together as well, so we had a lot of, could learn from each other as well. Making Our Truth Visible was another really emotional project that we did between ourselves, Falls Women's Centre, and women from the Shankill Road, and refugee women based across the border. And that was a photographic exhibition which brought a lot of people in, and it was just really brought to the forefront actually a lot of the fears and inequalities that people have. Walk the Walk is another one that got people from the Falls and the Shankill walking each other's areas, reminiscing about the areas, really getting together on a very much at ground level. Very successful, and exhibitions there. Now, the problem with all that is that the funding for Aisling's job came to an end. We applied to OFM, DFM for funding to start last April, and we still haven't got word one way or another. Fortunately, we have secured funding from Creative Belfast for, again, another big cross-community project, very much rooted in our working class areas. And now Aisling is employed in that job, but if she hadn't been, which we'll be doing a lot of, very much into the communities, looking at from the River Farset, from its source out to the Lagan, but for the next 2 years we're going to be doing what I imagine will be the biggest cross-community, community-based arts project in the city, with, again, opportunities for all ages and interests to be part of it. But had we not got that funding, we would have lost it, and a lot of what we would be saying we're doing would be in the past tense, to be honest, because I don't know how we would maintain it without the post. That really is the biggest recommendation we have, that you need people, because getting into the communities is very much about relationship building. You're actually building friends with people. And so it's so important that you have somebody who can dedicate to that, and not somebody who's just going to be away in a year or whatever. Also, I suppose the practice of engaging young people with the arts is vital, so that they're building the practice of attending events and participating in events. And we have a very vibrant youth programme. And we would engage the schools. I mean, as I say, from 0 to 5s in the Bopaga, their puppet programme. Then we have a theatre school, music classes. We have our youth club, which is about 50 kids coming in on a weekly basis. They will also use the community gallery to build an exhibition. We have links with the local schools, Flash the Parish, that will do their annual exhibition. We have an archaeologist who has done exhibitions bringing in different schools as well. So we have a pretty vibrant youth engagement, and I think that's really crucial as well. And after that, it's really about establishing the value of the arts across society. And that really is the job for government as well, to be cross-cutting. So, John Mochedge.
Thank you. Could I just make a few observations here? I've been into the centre on a number of occasions, and I've some understanding of how it functions and structured and so on. It seemed to me, just if you would comment on this, does it work? And I give 3 reasons here. One, it is supportive of the arts in the area because it's very much indigenous and rooted in the area, as opposed to dipping in for a while and moving away again. It's very much rooted in that area and it's permanent there. Secondly, it works because it's a good model financially. It does work. You're still you've stuck the course there, and because it is really cultural immersion when you go into the centre. You sense you're in a place that is Irish speaking. I was only there for the apple tart.
The apple tart's good.
It is extremely good. I want to put that on record. But it wasn't the only reason I was there. But it was one of the attractions.
Did you pay for it?
That was the second attraction.
You asked for it in Irish.
Yes, Ulster Scots.
What do you have with it?
Thirdly, there is in that area, I think, a cultural ecology that works, where you have the relationship between a whole series of cultural initiatives. You know, your relationship with the Féile and so on, different elements there. You've got there's a cultural life that has now become established and sustainable. And what we're looking at is in some other working communities, there may not be the same level of artistic activity or engagement with the arts and so on. Could you comment on those three points? The good model, that it's indigenous and rooted, and that there's a cultural ecology there that works.
Well, I think that when Culturland was started, it was certainly about opening up the Irish language and having a place where people would feel, and you didn't feel like you had to be fluent or anything to go into it. But at the same time, the founders very much saw it as creating a service or a place to go for Irish speakers and learners of Irish. And what we've discovered over time is that there are a lot more people who are interested and want to see it. People come, as tourists to see it. So I think that where they may have started providing Irish theatre and Irish music and that actually we have extended out an awful lot, and we have created the gallery spaces, and we have endeavoured to go out and to bring people in, so that, the model on its own works quite well. But actually, if you're going to, and it's sustainable to a degree, but to be really sustainable, we have to look far beyond the Irish language community. And I think that we do actively do that and work at doing that as well. We certainly wouldn't be still running events if we were dependent on Irish speakers or learners of Irish only. We are dependent on the English-speaking community as well to come in and to be part of our events.
So when I was talking about the financial model, I was thinking of the fact that you have tenants who then presumably pay rent into the. So if there's the office of the magazine or the television company, when whatever funding they get, there'll be someone that then was. So it's a recycling within.
Yeah, and that works to a degree, but they are. I mean, some of those organisations. I mean, the theatre company is also a struggling arts.
Yeah.
Company as well. So, you know, we work with each other, and it's. I suppose a lot of the things, you know, the cafe, the bookshop, and everything would be more. So yeah, the model works, but I'm not sure that it helps us to progress access on its own. And I think that if you were, I suppose we've had the benefit of time. We've grown over time, and we have reacted to what people wanted, but that's also reacting to people way outside as well.
Okay. Thank you. Cathal, do you want to?
Go ahead to carry the point you're over, taking question, Majin Shaw. You're very welcome to the committee here. I noted, and I say as a Gaelic, I know the work of the Culture and McAdam down through the years. It's been wonderful the way it's developed and the way indeed the word is spread across. We also have Culture O'Keenan and Derry and your Contra and through the Christian Esteoch, the rural culture that has been developed. And I was listening to some of your outreach projects there, and it's not a criticism, but a lot of it seems to be Belfast centric. I'm just wondering how you have integrated or connected with some of the other culture lands elsewhere, including the proposed rural ones that will be developed?
I would say that to date we haven't. We would have a certain amount of conversations with Cultural Nichanan, for example. But really we are quite Belfast centric now. At the moment we're also involved in a project with Kangel G, which is linking up the greater Gaeltacht of Scotland and Ireland. So in that we would be linking up now with Uncarn and a little bit more with Derry. And we are connected to the Irish language arts groups, well, across the island of Ireland, but also in the north as well. So in that is a relatively new initiative to bring all the Irish language arts groups together. And gradually they are coming on board, but we've been very much a part of that. So that's, you know, across Donegal and right across the 9 counties. And we will be hoping that other groups will join in that, and they are being invited to. But we have been working a bit more with Uncarn, and Aisling Garrett, the theatre company, have just been there as well.
I'm glad to hear that. Uncarn, I think, is probably one of the best, is the best example of a rural development of the language and arts and the community as well. You're coming up to the 25th anniversary, obviously. What expansion plans are there? Okay, can you tell us?
What money do you have?
Well, personally,
well, I mean, we've obviously just done our big extension to the building, and we have this major project coming up with the Creative Belfast. So that is going to take up a lot of our time, and there's an element of consolidation I think that needs to happen as well, because we want to be sustainable into the next 25 years. I mean, certainly we would like to buy out the rest of our building. There's a part at the back that is being used by another charitable organisation. They would like to move. We would like to move into it. We feel that we could do a lot with the space. And that is going to take government departments to join up together and to make that happen. And maybe we won't hold our breath in the next couple of years, but certainly that we would like to expand. We feel that we can expand and that we could do so much more, because there is high demand for all our spaces. We don't have any empty space. We're frequently, rooms are doubling up, rooms that are galleries during the day or classrooms at night, and that.
And our theatre could use a bit of a makeover. I mean, I went to school in the building that I'm now working. I was one of the first students from Manscott First, and our theatre is pretty much the same as it was when I was having my school lunches there, doing my GCSEs. So we could use a bit of a refurb there.
Okay. All right. We'll go to the Mago. I'm over the shin.
Oh, aye.
Future.
Karen McKevitt.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks for
Sorry,
no problem.
I got in the wrong word of it. Well,
Go on ahead.
Yeah, go on ahead.
I'll wait, it's okay.
Oh, super.
okay.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I don't speak Gaelic, but on your presentation you've given me a great insight into the good work that you are doing. But I have family members who Gaelic is their first language at home, and I know you've talked about that you're probably based in Belfast and it's right, but I want to know what outreach programmes you do for, like of the surrounding council areas, or if any in the future plans, and also when LEFA was first established, have you seen an uptick in your groups in that programme? Speak to them.
All our programmes, well, there's LEFA, and there's also the fact that we had a shiny new building there. So actually, across the board, everything that we're doing in the last few years, they have had an increase in numbers, and definitely there is huge interest in learning the language, and it's coming from everywhere. And we are, again, reacting to that and doing more classes during the day and that kind of thing. We still aren't, I would absolutely accept that we don't reach out enough to rural areas. Now, there's a little bit of it. For example, we have Fleadh Thursday coming up at the end of November. And we will be widely publicising that and trying to bring it in and engaging all schools in the arts competition, for example. Santa Claus is coming to Culturland, and we have a lot of groups coming from rural areas. Youth groups and school groups are coming up for that. It isn't an awful lot. And then working with, as say, across the province, the Irish language arts groups. That we're bringing an exhibition to Donegal the end of the month, for example. They're going to bring an exhibition back to us then next year. So it really does come down to human resources, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of the outreach work that we've done over the past few years has come through me, and a lot of that has been on a good relations basis, because that's how I was employed. So, for example, we'd have people, more engagement people from Castlereagh than from Andytown, maybe, so that was more just down to the way the funding streams came. Yeah. So I was funded to do that kind of work. That was the kind of work we did. So again, just to reiterate,
to be fair, we have drawn in, like Falls Women's Centre will be involved in a lot of things as well. And
through that, yes. But in terms of schools, it would be Ashfield and that kind of.
Yeah, just about 300 people using your premises weekly. It seems quite a big. I have never been, so. But
I'll be a lot more than 300 people using premises weekly. That's only the people who are involved in weekly events.
Okay.
Then there's other people who are coming in to use the spaces for meetings, etc. Different community groups coming in using it and all the other things. So we reckon we have about 100,000 people coming through the doors per year.
Okay. Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Rosie McCorley.
Gurmaiogad Carly, thanks, Chair, and August Gurmaiogad as Captain Sharon Madgen, August on Carlaher, and thank you for coming this morning and for the presentation. I declare my interest as an Irish language activist and as a member of the Christian Estiach Gaelic, which his remit is to see as many culture lands set up throughout the north. Yeah. And you mean yourselves in the culture land in West Belfast, you've been the model really and the pioneer. And I suppose it fulfills that need that there is for the growing Irish language community to have a life outside the home, outside the school, where people go to meet other people and to use their Irish and to just enjoy the culture and what they can get from that. So, like Moishiv, you know, as an Obershin, and to Hain, Aisling, you know, it's great work. That outreach work is really, really good. I'm wondering about the tourism aspect, because tourists are drawn to the Culture Land. It's a landmark for tourists. And do you do much in terms of trying to reach out internationally, or does it just happen? How does that work for you?
Well, we have actually been focusing. No, absolutely, we reach out to people. We've been focusing on cruise ships for a few years and getting more of those groups into. We do a Gaeltacht experience. Well, it can be normally an evening, but it can be lunchtime or whatever as well, where people come for a meal. There's maybe an exhibition of Irish dancing, there'll be live music, and it ends up with a céilí that they're all expected to get up and take part in. So yes, we've been bringing in more and more groups to do that. Now, we would also have links with certain universities, Northern Europe, you know, conflict resolution people that come. We have a number of groups that come annually from America. Smaller groups, bigger groups, and they could do workshops like Boron workshops or, you know, various different things. So yeah, we do focus on that. We work with the Welcome Centre a lot, and Fáilte First here, obviously. So yeah, that's an important one, really.
We've all just done World Host training as well.
Yes.
Same thing. And I'd say too, Culture Land has always been a tourist attraction. Even since I was in school there, I can remember groups of tourists coming in, waving to them during a maths class. So it's just building on that.
Sure. Can I ask also, I mean, we know about the East Belfast Irish Language Project, and, you know, it's very successful and to be commended. Do you do outreach work? Is there any evidence that there is more of that happening? Because I think it's important that everybody would understand that the Irish language is for everybody. And I mean, this week there was a bit of negative publicity around the Irish language, which is unfortunate. So it's about how do you get around that one? Do you meet sort of hostility, or what about that cross community work? How's it going?
It depends. I meet people all the time, and sometimes it's very successful, and sometimes it's not quite as successful. I mean, we have run Irish language classes on the Shankill Road without it ever publicising it, or without it ever being known, primarily because that's what the people who are learning it feel most comfortable with doing. But I've never felt, I mean, I've been into some buildings before which might be a bit intimidating, but I don't find them intimidating, and it's fine. Maybe some people are intimidated by the Irish language, but generally I think after a while, once they realise you don't have an agenda, you know, it's fine. I think what Linda's doing is fantastic, and we do obviously, once Linda started her Irish language classes, we did obviously go over and chat to the classes and tell them what we have, and she brings them over to us and they get their lunch, and we do tours and things. We work with the Centre for a long time. We never started Irish language classes there, however they have been quite keen on the céilís. You know, there's always, for us it's more breaking down the barriers of what people's attitudes are to us first, and it's not necessarily that anybody has to learn Irish, but it's just that everybody can tolerate each other, and there's a lot of groundwork to be done before anything else can move on. We have a group now who come in and learn Irish with us, Women United, and they're a group of women from Ballysillan, the Shankill and Ardoyne. So they already had that cross-community ethos. They're just coming in to learn Irish from us because we used to work with the Shankill Women's Centre. Only they lost the funding for their community outreach officer. So we've actually ended up getting a lot of their groups come to us now. So it has been very positive. There hasn't been, we haven't really experienced anything too negative. Well, like Emer was saying, we have the Townsend street party, the last one we had there was a bit of Irish on the banner, and on the Shankill side it was cut down, but that's been the only real negative. People are on an individual level quite happy to engage, but just maybe not publicly.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. Basil?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've been up a couple of times, and even I think took part in an Irish language radio broadcast, which was pretty interesting because I didn't speak very much Irish, but anyway, I give it a go. I'm interested in this, how brave you might want to be, because obviously there is a certain political attachment to the language which maybe you're not that comfortable with. I don't know what your position is, but there is, the Irish language does have a certain political element to it. How do you think we would depoliticise it?
Well, I think if it's politicised by other people, not by us. We just take I mean, Calderland from the very, very beginning, you know, we were very lucky, I think, that the founders were non-political, non-religious, and they just saw it as normalising the language, and that has been very, very strong right through.
You use the word "if." Do you think I'm wrong to say that it's politicised? Do you think that's not correct?
I think that other people will try and politicise it. I don't think that we politicise it. I think that we just, do you know what? It's my language, and we are not interested in, if you don't want to learn it, you don't need to learn it, but what you do need to do is accept that it's my language and that it's my right to speak it.
Yeah, but I could also say it's my language. I mean, I was taught it at school as well.
Of course it is. Yeah,
but it is.
I went to school in a...
But Basil, at this stage of your life, if you want to speak it, that's great, and I'll do anything to encourage you. But if you don't want to, I'm equally easy with that, you know.
But I just think that you need, I mean this gently, I just think that we need to be a bit braver. I mean, I've had Linda up here singing, choral stuff in Irish and whatever. So I just wonder about how you try and really reach cultural norms. Like there was an interesting, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I will just say to you, look, there was a very interesting programme on Spotlight recently about Irish nationalists that were involved in the Somme. And you just wonder about how you try and take the strength of your branding and try and incorporate other people's, about whether we can have issues, you know, on those type of things, you know, exhibitions and such like. So could Culturalland do something about the Somme?
Well, not necessarily the Somme, because that, I mean, we're an Irish language arts organisation. It might not necessarily be our place to do that, but in terms of, if you're saying people might see us as a nationalist, well, we're called Culturalland McAdam O'Faith, and McAdam is from Robert Shipboy McAdam, who was a Presbyterian businessman from the 19th century, who ran the Soho Foundry. You might know the song, you know, the Boys of the Soho Foundry. We have done quite a lot in terms of engaging people through that particular person. Again, going back to the Townsend Street Festival, Soho Foundry was on Townsend Street, and it employed 90-something% Protestants. But that's, I mean, these were people who were engaged in reviving the Irish language. They weren't, these Presbyterians who were engaged in reviving the Irish language, it's not just a nationalist background. You know, the history isn't nationalist.
I think we also need to, like, absolutely, we promote the language and we're very proud to do it. But when you're going into, you know, other areas or there's other sensibilities, you have to be mindful of that. I mean, when we were working with, there's certain groups that we're working with who don't want you to publicise what you're doing because they're afraid it'll create difficulties in their areas. Well, we have to respect that, you know.
Yeah, Linda's very brave, but not everybody feels.
I mean, there's an awful lot more interest in the Irish language among Protestant communities around Belfast. It's not all East Belfast, but people don't always.
Could I just say, Basil, the purpose today is not to have an exploration of the Irish language, because that's a subject that we may well look at on some other occasion. It is an inquiry into the arts and working class communities, and particularly the focus, I think, is around the success and the reasons for the success of Cultureland in terms of promoting, developing the arts within that particular part of West Belfast.
So do you not think, Chair, that the bit I was trying to explore is that if you were looking at the Somme, that there was both the Ulster division and the Irish divisions, and that there are issues where you might have looked at some unity where the thing comes across? I just say to you that I'll finish it because you want me to move on. But actually, the word Cultureland doesn't resonate with me particularly, though it's not. I'm just saying I don't really get it. The name of the gentleman that was with it, it's sort of lost in there somewhat on that. So it's not a problem. I'm just saying it's not reaching out to me, and I would be one of the people that would be, very supportive. I mean, I'm like all for it. I'm just going to do it, but we do have to talk to people, if you'll pardon the pun, not in our language but in theirs. We need to find ways of reaching to people on terms and issues that they would be, because I think once you do that, people say actually there's a lot of shared history. The Presbyterians did an awful lot for the Irish language. Whenever I went to Skye, everything that's up there is written in Gaelic. There are connections around which, if non-threatening, are actually uniting. But I just think we need to maybe look at things in other people's terms.
Yeah, but...
Okay, Basil,
I'm finished.
Yeah. I think, sorry, okay.
Okay, but I'm just going to take the example of the stained glass window that we did in Cultureland with Windsor Women's Centre. That is the congregation that moved from the building we're in to South Belfast. We connected with them and they did it, and they designed the window. And then we had all the Mór Uaisle of the Presbyterian Church were there, as well as people who had been to the Girls' Brigade in that building, and it was their community building when they were children. They were really happy that it was still a community building, actually, and that was a hugely successful project. But it was a natural project as well, something that, there was a natural link there, and it was a really good way of connecting with people.
Okay, thank you. William?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Part of your presentation, you were saying, Emer, that your organisation's role, or part of it, is normalising the Irish language and the Irish language arts. As the Chair said, today is about your reach into sort of working class communities, and you did mention as well there are particular socio-economic difficulties in West Belfast. In evidence that we've had before this committee from other groups like yourselves, I personally would be aware of the work that has been going on at the Spectrum Centre, but we've equally had evidence and testimonies from, for example, East Belfast arts people. And one of the things they said was that there's a difficulty in getting people in East Belfast to cross the bridge to go into the city centre. We've had evidence from New Lodge arts who were saying that perhaps they on certain occasions needed incentivisation for people to go to the MAC, which isn't terribly far away from the New Lodge. So there is a problem of working class people, wherever they come from in the city, and going and participating in the arts, whether it's actually participating or just going along to watch and listen. We also have issues that the Crescent Arts Centre talked about in terms of people from the Lower Ormo and Sandy Row as well, even though they're sort of in between both areas. How are you addressing that? Because I picked up on two things you said. You talked about older folk going over to East Belfast to the Strand Cinema, and you talked about people going from West Belfast to see the Bolshoi Ballet, which I'm sure, I come from working class and live in a working class area. It wouldn't be top of people's list to go to the Bolshoi Ballet. Can I ask you, how do you get people to take part in those things? And what are the difficulties you overcome to do that, for them, enabling them to do that?
Transport.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also like when you build a group and then you're offering them something like that to do. When there's a group dynamic there and people are already engaged doing something else and you're offering them that, I think that's the way it has really happened before.
Yeah, I'd say for us to bring any other group into our centre, the first thing that we'd have to do is go out to their centre, you know, and you build up the relationship, and then you have to have the money to pay for, if you're already running your event, to pay for a bus, to get the free tickets, all that sort of a thing.
So it's transport and the free tickets?
I actually find transport is a big issue for us. So if we are doing something, say, with the Strand Cinema or
With schools or anything, it's always what's the block is that we're going to need a bus, you know.
And it's not even to do with like it being a cross community issue. There are lots of people, particularly in areas well around us, who don't leave their area, who get everything they need from within, and who don't feel comfortable. For example, maybe going to the Mac or the Opera House or whatever. And you do have to.
Well, can I just? I don't mean to be rude and interrupt you, but why do you think they don't feel comfortable?
Just not used to it. And I suppose that's some sort of a legacy from the Troubles, where you didn't leave your own area or what have you. But the feeling that that's not for you or you're not welcome there. I mean, think something that the Culturland does very well, and that's to do with the design of it. Is our gallery is visible from the outside. And you already know what you're walking into before you go into it. Sometimes it can be a wee bit scary, a little bit intimidating to go into some buildings which are absolutely fabulous, but you don't know what's inside and you don't know how people are going to react to you.
But that's why I think that getting the group together, first of all, that you build a group dynamic within Culturland, a place that they do find easy to go into, or the Spectrum, where, you know, within their own community, then you can bring them to somewhere else much more easily.
Yeah.
It becomes.
When we had the guys up from the Spectrum, they were saying that the people in the Shankill, and I would agree with this analysis, and I'm just interested from the perspective of where you're based in the Falls and the West Belfast community, which is, you know, largely nationalist. They were saying that the people in the Shankill, you know, readily identify and take part in and celebrate their culture. But arts is seen as something a bit more detached and a bit more highbrow. What would your view be in that?
Depends on what your idea of what the arts is, really.
Self-defining, yeah.
I think that people are quite open to engaging, really. I mean, you know, we have so many people coming to exhibitions, taking part in the community gallery area is always well subscribed. Drama, I would say community drama is very strong in the area.
And music.
So.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that they're all engaging, but what I'm saying is, do you think they're engaging in what they see as their art, their culture or arts? That's the point I'm trying to make.
Is it the point of what they identify with?
Their self-definition.
They see it as relevant, certain things as relevant to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just hard to answer that question because it's hard to split culture and arts in a lot of cases. It depends on what you identify as being your culture.
Okay, and finally, can I ask you, you mentioned Creative Belfast, that's the new fund from the council, isn't it? Yeah, and what are you going to do with the money that you've been allocated from the council?
Wonderful things. Well, actually, we're partners with the Spectrum Centre for that. So we know the guys quite well. It's an initiative based on the River Farset, and a lot of it is actually in challenging what we think of as our communities. How are they there? So the River Farset coming from Squires Hill down to Lagan. If you look at the course that it runs, and the communities that grew up around it, they grew up through industry. And a lot of the mills and foundries and factories aren't there anymore, but and a lot of the mill houses, and except those wonderful ones on Tennant Street aren't there anymore, but the communities are still there, so it's really a way of engaging them with that heritage, but through the arts. We really hope to, we're supposed to have a spectacle event in 2016, and we really hope that that will raise the bar for what is expected in the communities where the river flows through. We also really hope that we'll be informed by the communities. We have a community steering group made up from various people who live, work or in school or what have you, stakeholders in the area. It's really an idea of a shared story, and how do we bring that to life in a way that's, a lot of times when people talk about community art, they only expect a certain amount of professionalism out of it. You know, even when we're doing the applications, there's an awful lot of what is community art, and we're trying to bring this to a bigger level and have like something that gives people a source of pride. They would say that took place here. It's brilliant.
I think just picking up on something there, because I wanted to draw the session to an end, but just to ask two questions. Rosie McCorley made mention of an organisation she's involved with, which was about using cultural land in a sense, I suppose. He's talked about a model and a pioneer for other culture lands elsewhere, as in the one up in Londonderry. Could you just get some sense of that, how that works, maybe Rosie as well as yourselves?
Well, I mean, I said a wee bit about the intention. Culturland is like a hub of activity, which is a focal point for Gaelgorry, places where people can go to socialise and use their Irish. And I mean, I think Culturland has been really, really successful in doing that in West Belfast. It's on the map. And now we have a Culturland in Derry, in Carntucher, in Armagh, and there are a number of other projects which are seeking to create a Culturland of their own, and each of them are quite unique. If I'm sure you would agree, there's none of them are identical. They all sort of grow up in the community that they're rooted in, and they have their own particular aspects. For instance, the one in Newry, it was you might know this, Karen. This is Seamus McCardle was the person who I think he granted a legacy to it, you know, in terms of a house. And I mean, that's a fabulous place, but it's different from Culturland, Belfast and Derry. So the purpose of it is to it's a social focal point for people to
is there some?
I think that what you find as well is we get people coming to Culturland from not just the island of Ireland, but from Scotland and Wales and the Isle of Man, and it's about, you know, reviving minority languages. So I think that's really important. That it is.
Is there a network or some organisation?
There is no formal.
I wasn't familiar with the Irish terminology used.
There is there's a body called Cistrin Esteach Gaeilge, which is an Irish language investment fund, and that was set up. Came out of the Hillsborough Agreement. And the purpose of that is to fund capital projects in the Irish language. And yeah, it fits in with the revival of the Irish language.
Okay, that's helpful indeed. Thanks very much indeed. It's a bit of a meandering session. We touched on a wide range of issues, but none of the no harm in that. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciated that very much indeed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, and you're all very welcome.
Slán go fóill.
Right, next one. We're somewhat behind time because there's quite a lot of other things to go through, and we've also got the Sport NI section at the end. So if I press ahead, you'll bear with me, I'm sure, in that regard. The next item on the agenda is research paper on waterways registration licensing fees, and that's on page 85. So could ask
Chair, I just want members to hang on to this one for the minute, because we have further correspondence coming back from Waterways, Waterways Ireland will make more sense of what we've received in Dr. Hull's research paper, but it's the information members have asked about comparative registration fees. But if we can hold it until we get the further correspondence coming in from Waterways Ireland, so we can look at everything in a complete picture.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
You'll find then on page 90 the response from the Minister in regard to the sporting success of Colin Turkington at the British Touring Car Championship. Content to note that. Page 92 has a response regarding the LIFA funding. Somewhat brief. The committee had asked if Forest of Gaelic was involved when the Minister was setting up her LIFA initiative. The Minister confirms that Forest was not in the position to deliver LIFA, but have been involved in the creation of the LIFA website. Still fine.
Sorry, can I just point?
Right, yes.
Where is the answer to the question in that letter?
That's what I was about to. Yeah.
There isn't.
Do you want to spell that out a bit more?
Well, there isn't. When we asked a question in the letter that you sent, asking the question about the funding, that letter is totally inadequate because it doesn't answer the question. I mean, you know, with a discussion at the start of this committee about the role of this committee, that's entirely the role of the committee, to ask questions around these issues. And here we have you as chair of this committee, scrutiny committee, the department, asking the Minister a direct question, and she's failed to answer it.
I think one of the,
that's good enough.
Yeah, I would endorse that comment, because regarding LIFA, there is no clarity still. All you're getting is drip feeding of information back. There is no clarity, and from officials and the Minister, there has not been clarity around how this was initiated. Was there a proper equality impact assessment carried out? Are other cultures, traditions being treated equally? Why this was prioritised by her personally in the way that it was? Where the money's coming from, what it's being taken from, what it's being prioritised over. All of this is being drip fed, and you cannot scrutinise something when you're drip fed information. There should be a proper overview of LIFA, and when questions were put to Arthur Scott from the department when he was here, they found them somewhat incomprehensible. So I still haven't in the response from the Minister, we're not getting what we need. So I think, how do we pursue this matter? Do we, I think, maybe write back and ask for, say, I would suggest, or maybe somebody else would, that express some concern about the way that information has been provided, the lack of transparency. You can only scrutinise something when people are being transparent, and could we have clear, maybe if I say maybe in that regard for next week, if people have particular questions they want framed for information, we put those together and get a letter off. Table that next week then for consideration. People are happy enough with that, because it is. You get little bits, but that's just not helpful, and some bits just aren't answered. Yeah.
Just for myself, Chair, I mean, I'm pretty clear of what it's about. It's an initiative to encourage.
We're aware of that. We know that. The questions are the questions that I asked there. How this was prioritised, equality assessment as to how that related to the impact of working with a single cultural community, and no comparable intervention for any other cultural community. how was this prioritised over other things, because there's budgetary pressures, as we only too well know, within the department. So all of those questions that were listed earlier are the questions. The general thrust of it, yes, it's about encouraging people to be engage with the Irish language and to start learning it. That's clear. It's all of the background to it that I think is lacking.
But I suppose on the point you said, you're saying a lack of a comparable language. There is no comparable language to do a LEFA type initiative on. That would work.
Well, quite frankly, I find that comment deeply, deeply insulting and offensive, because there are two minority languages. Well, it is. There are two minority languages in Northern Ireland, both recognised by the United Kingdom government in terms of the Council of Europe Charter for Regional Minority Languages. Every minister is supposed to be signed up to it for both languages. Although we sat on the Committee for Education yesterday and seen the disparity and the discrimination in preferential treatment for Irish over Ulster Scots in terms of education. There's an awful lot more in this terms of this discrimination that needs to be exposed, because that comment to basically say that they basically wipe out the Ulster Scots language by saying there's nothing comparable. If you have a language that was brought here by Scottish settlers 400 years ago and it's got 400 years of history.
Can I just say, Chair, I'm saying it's not comparable because...
Why is it not comparable? How do you compare them?
Because it's different. I mean, that's well documented.
What do you mean it's different?
Of experts. There are totally different stages of development.
No.
The LEFA campaign is to encourage people to learn Irish. You don't have a standardised
and is it not the case then?
Ulster Scots.
And of course, we only had standardised Irish in the 20th century when the government in Dublin imposed it.
Imposed?
Yes, because they set down the determination. That's how that was done. That's how you standardise any language. There has to be some official body that comes to a final decision on these things. That's how it was done back to De Valera's time. But in regard to the position of support, I would simply say that because a language is recognised under the European Charter at Part 2 status, is actually maybe the reason for giving more resources to it to enable it to move forward and catch up. There's a lot of work to be done, but I just found your comment offensive. But we'll move on and leave it from there.
Can I just say, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, Ulster Scots. I value culture and language.
That's good.
I'm just making the point that there's a difference between status Part 2 and Part 3, and to say that you could have a LEFA type campaign for Ulster Scots. I mean,
I didn't say that there should be a LEFA campaign.
But I think you did.
No, I said that there should be an initiative. It doesn't have to be the same initiative. The initiative would be different because the two languages are in different places. But it should have the same level of resources. If there's $250,000 or whatever it is being put into one, I would like to see on the basis of equality similar investment. William?
Yeah, Chair, I'm alarmed at what I've heard today, because I thought in the Belfast Agreement Sinn Féin had signed up to acceptance of Ulster Scots. I mean, the Ulster Scots Agency came out of the Belfast Agreement, so I'm alarmed at that. And obviously also as well in terms of the St Andrews and Hillsborough agreements subsequently. So I think that's something which should give Ulster Scots community and the agencies that are charged of developing it some real concern. But could I also suggest that we write to Ferdy McNally, the Chief Executive of Forest na Gaeilge, because this letter, this response, this failure to answer has raised another question. I would like to ask why Forest na Gaeilge wasn't in a position to deliver LEFA. Because if civil servants are doing it, why is the body that's funded by the government here and the government in the Irish Republic to develop the Irish language officially not in a position to deliver the LEFA project, and civil servants are? And I think that's something I'd like an answer to.
And that would be a separate letter, because the other letter would be going to the Minister.
Yeah.
So members can
Chair, just not to go over old ground there, but I did think in terms of the LEFA initiative, you said it was a comparable initiative was the word you used, as far as I recall. And the other thing is the remit with Forest and Gaelic not necessarily covered the LEFA initiative, so the two things are separate. I think we need some clarification there.
Sorry, first point was that I said that there should be some comparable in terms of investment.
Comparable initiative in terms of LEFA.
Comparable does not mean the same as identical.
Well, that's how it sounded to me. So, I mean,
obviously you misunderstood then.
Yeah.
And secondly, then William has proposed that we write to the
Chief Executive
of Forest Gaeilge and ask for clarification on that point. I'm sure members are happy enough to get explanation on that. Okay. Thank you. Moves us on then to the next matter. Decal response at page 94 regarding funding for Irish Football Association, Ulster Rugby and Ulster GAA post 2015. Decal secured $4.5 million within the current CSR for the programme amongst the big three sports. The governing bodies are creating a programme evaluation to demonstrate the impact of the funding, PET, PSE funding. The Minister states that Decal will attempt to manage the pressure. However, failing that, the Department will bid to the Executive for funding in the next CSR. Are members content to note at this stage? Are there any further questions? Okay. Brings us then on to the next, page 97. Language funding comparison, and their figures there presented by the Minister. I think would be actually worth getting an opportunity to. I haven't had a chance yet to go through those in detail. I would like to have that opportunity because I think there are elements such as the investment fund there that was mentioned, and of course then there's the disparity in the funding also of the broadcast fund between Irish and Ulster Scots, a whole range of things there that need to be looked at. The specific question we asked was in regard to, I think, funding for, just get to check the detail. The letter actually says that your department has provided for the Irish language and Ulster Scots. Now, the position there, of course, and it's a good point reminded of that, the money for the development, the infrastructure that was mentioned that came out of the Hillsborough Agreement, that would not be coming through Decal, presumably. That's separate. That's Treasury money. Mm-hmm. In the same way as it was Treasury money that was put into the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund. And of course, also then there's a number of things here. A whole series of issues about the extent of the disparity and differential in funding. We've got part of the picture here, but I think we'd like to come back to that again and get a bit more, find just exactly how much has been drawn down of the Treasury money and so on, or the details of that. Okay. But are members content to note the response as it is at the moment? Okay. Brings us then to page 100 and sub-regional stadia funding. And the response from the Minister. The Minister estimates the programme will take 2 years to develop and a further 2 years to complete. This is the football sub-regional stadia funding. Goes on to say that clubs need to be in a position to take advantage of easements or slippages from capital project. She suggests the creation of development cost budget is critical, allowing clubs to develop schemes to a state of readiness, and that would allow clubs to engage with the IFA and NI Football League on programme delivery and allow clubs to appoint specialist advisors. Now, are we, and David isn't with us today, he has a particular expertise, this is William in the field of particular interest in this. Are you content with the response there? Or are we getting enough information from the IFA as well? Or?
Chair, if I could just remind members, we have an outstanding letter from IFA, I think it's due next week, where we've asked for a lot of these issues from them, clarification on a lot of issues we'd previously written to them, and they hadn't set out specifics. They referred us to a document on their website that didn't have specifics. We've now asked for those specifics, and that letter, I think, is coming due next week. That should clear up a few things.
I think that's important because George Robinson asked a similar sort of question at question time earlier in the week. Obviously, he's an interest in relation to Coleraine, but particularly Limavady, which is a sort of the old B division club, I think championship now. But I think, Chair, to be honest, I think the point when we were raising this a number of weeks ago, we talked about confidence and clarity and certainty. I'm not sure there's any of that in these responses. Now, I appreciate there are difficulties in terms of budgets and so on, and perhaps budgets weren't agreed when this letter was drafted and all of that. But David has particular skills in that I don't, and he actually is charged with running a club. I don't know how you run a club and take a club forward in development of a ground, given responses like that. I'm not being critical, but I just think we need to get a bit more certainty, and that's not just from the government, that has to come from the IFA as well, because obviously the government will give the money to the IFA, I would imagine.
Chair, we have asked for a lot of specifics in that letter, and I think once we see that, if those specifics are responded to, then we'll know a lot more about the whole situation.
That's fine. We'll get that for next week then.
Can we just, on that point, there's a statement there that says it will take just over 2 years to develop the programme. It seems remarkably precise, but without any detail. I wonder if we could just have, what is the timeline? Just tell me how you get to just over 2 years. I want to see what the milestones are to get to the stage, because the earliest to say is 4 years, and that does not seem to be in it. So since they've got enough detail to say just over 2 years, could we please just say what? Show me your timelines that actually accumulate in that figure.
This is something that
we go ahead and we write on that, Chair.
It's getting the right relationship there between the IFA and the department, that the clubs have the proposals worked up, they've been assessed, and I would thought most of the clubs already know exactly what's required, but we'll see in due course.
And where's it going then?
The Midnight Soccer Scheme, the copious report on that, which runs on extensively, as has been said here, is copious in its content. It's there anyway for reading. If we note that, the next one then is page...
You said the pictures are a bit dark.
That's probably our copy.
It's not.
We're taking it at night.
It's more floodlight than midnight. We've got then the response there by the membership of the Ulster Scots Language and Culture Development Initiative Advisory Group. Might be useful also to ask for... Oh, sorry. Sorry, the next bit missed the next bit. That's fine. Then, if we note that, Creative Industries Ministerial Advisory Forum on the Creative Industries would ask in regard to that. So there's a response at page 193. Members content to note that.
Can I just...
Yes?
If you haven't moved off it yet?
No, it's...
So, what's the difference between a forum and a task force? Because that seems to be what they've actually agreed. At the inaugural meeting of the forum, they decided to rename it an action group.
And what's the difference between a task force and an action group?
It's given a task.
It's work for it. Can be a document.
And what is our engagement with this group? Because creative industries are obviously pretty central to what we do. Do we have any connection with a ministerial action group? Do they come to this committee to talk, for example?
Chair, the action group only established at the start of this session, so there hasn't been an opportunity to engage yet. I think it's a case of them developing a programme for the committee to engage with. It has only met once. There are intentions for it to meet again another couple of times before March, and then it'll meet on a regular basis after that. We can engage directly with the group if members wish. I think it's just a case of they've only just established, developed their new name, and I'm not sure how much work has been done yet, but we can find out.
I just think the question is, I could see how this committee could engage with a forum or an industry sectoral group. There may be some difficulties in engaging with a ministerial issue, because they might say, well, procedurally that goes through the minister. So all I would like to ask, whatever timescale that you want, is how would we engage as a committee with this group? Would they come if we want it before us, or how would we do that?
Chair, I can't see any reason why not.
Peter, would it be possible, do you know the people who are on this? Because the reason I mention it is there's an absolutely first-class fella who the Chair will know in Belfast City Council, Brendan McGoran, who is their creative arts person. And it just seems to me, if you're going to have a forum and to take things forward, or task force, whatever it's going to be called, having people like him who've been working in this field for some time would be really very important, I think.
Chair, absolutely. I don't think there'd be any difficulty. I think that the department would be entirely comfortable with the committee engaging with the group. And if there are people with specialist knowledge, the gentleman that Mr. Humphrey has already mentioned isn't on that list.
He's not.
I'm sure if he has a particular specialist knowledge that there'd be no issue around engagement.
Just Belfast City Council have been doing it a long, long time. And
They have. And that, the North by Northwest.
South by Southwest.
That's the name of our film.
Is it a film? I was just going to say, yes, that's classic as well. No, well read, Chair, well read.
Thank you.
Is it black and white?
One of them quiet ones that was no
Quiet ones,
It's a talkie, yes, definitely a talkie. South by Southwest.
We'll engage.
Yes, he was very much into that whole world of.
And for a time worked alongside decal officials. Yeah.
So, that takes us through all of those. Note that at this stage, we'll follow up on that suggestion there. Then page 200, 2013 UK City of Culture. Committee requested a breakdown of the spend. Of the £12.6 million allocated to the event, £9 million was allocated to the cultural programme, 1.6 to marketing and £2 million to Optimism Bias. The final account includes a drawdown request of over £550,000, subject to approval following consideration of a benefits realisation from Londonderry City Council being considered by the department at present. Decal secured £2 million for legacy spends between January and March of this year, delivering key projects from the cultural programme, and it's also opened a North West office, which I understand is headed up by John McConway. Successful bids for additional funding to support community and cultural development were submitted to the October monitoring round, and business cases are under development at present. Intend to note. Page 205 then is in regard to the savings delivery plans for 13-14, and that paper provides a breakdown of the £8 million of savings delivered by Decal. Any questions, or are you content to note that at this stage?
Noted.
Okay. Then,
Chair, do you mind? I'm sorry, I only just turned the page. That. Well, I'm happy if you want to go. But just the City of Culture, the bids were successful in new business case for £2.8 million worth of capital funding to support sporting and cultural infrastructure. How is that legacy? You know, like this question came about because we slipped in an additional, I think it was either £2 or £4 million in October monitoring. You know, and we were talking. I don't want to cross it, but we were talking about stadia and would they be available? You know, available. This is a spend of £2.8 million for capital funding to support sporting and cultural infrastructure.
What a breakdown of that.
Well, maybe we should just ask what that is. You know, because we're spending $1 million here and $1 million there. So pretty soon you end up to real money.
Chair, we can ask for further breakdown. I think part of it's the Northwest Sporting Village, which we had previous information on. that will be a large part of the capital spend, so there's a lasting legacy in terms of the greater northwest area, but we can ask for a specific breakdown.
We've already had this discussion. This was about spreading the load in terms of the City of Culture year and right across the northwest to Korean.
Where is the Northwest Sporting Village located?
Korean.
Oh, that's all right. That's a fine place.
It's not my constituency. Of course, it's a fine place, but
Well, let's just ask the question, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to see, just because it's in the background of the monitoring round, is what is the 2.8 million for capital funding? What is that to be broken down?
Right.
And
we'll ask that.
If you do that, and you do the revenue as well, since you won letter. But sorry for being late.
Right. Sorry.
Okay.
Page 209 brings us to Departmental Board on the Arts, regarding the Departmental Board on the Arts Strategy. Membership of the board has been included. The committee had previously asked for an update on the arts strategy, and this will be provided once cleared. Tend to note. Brings us then to page 214. Northwest 200 and safety procedures. £2 million capital sport NI invested between 2009 and 2011, and I remember it well. 110,000 was allocated to 2x4 steering group for safety bales to be used at various motor racing events. No further capital funding will be available for the remainder of this financial year. Instead, the department is assisting with the health and safety review of motor racing. Sport NI is continuing to work with the Motorcycle Union of Ireland to deliver a code of practice for health and safety. I'm going to forward that correspondence to the Northwest Organising Committee. We do that.
Can I express just some disappointment because after the presentation the Northwest people did here, and also that was more than the Northwest was looking to actually share that with other events.
And the intention even in that earlier investment, I think, was that bales and so on, if they were provided, would be shared around. But if anyone wants to come back on that again, we can do that. But that's the Minister's answer at present. Okay. Brings us to Minister's response regarding funding for the Ulster Orchestra on page 218. Members should also note the response on this from the Deputy Minister, which has been tabled. Just to table items.
It's a single page just that was left in members' places.
Thanks. I think the point there, the Deputy one, is that their role is around PR and marketing. The issue with the orchestra is around core funding costs. So we've got the response from the Minister there on 218 and on 219. The department hasn't been approached to provide any bridging funding to the orchestra. The Minister is of the opinion that something more long-term is required. Once the orchestra has identified longer-term solutions, the department will meet with the orchestra to discuss the next steps. The Deputy Minister's response indicates that while none of the Tourist Board's funds are currently open for application, they would be happy to assist with promoting and marketing the orchestra.
Chair,
yes.
was the bridges that was said in the presentation not from Belfast City Council?
Chair, they had approached Belfast City Council. I know Belfast City Council have met twice on this. A conclusion hasn't been reached. My understanding was that the approach had been to Belfast City Council. Members will recall the correspondence from the committee was based around trying to see if there were other avenues for that money, i.e. writing to the DCAM Minister and writing to the Deputy Minister.
The impression I got in her statement or answer in the House around this to one of the questions was that if there was long-term sustainability, the implication was that there would be an openness to some sort of bridging funding.
Chair, I'm also aware that the Arts Council is dealing directly with, you'll recall, Trevor Green, one of the gentlemen that presented for the Ulster Orchestra, has been brought in because he has wide experience in sustainable orchestra models, and that's what the orchestra is working on at the minute. Is this sustainable model going forward where they are able to branch out into more areas of funding? That's being worked on at the minute between him and I think in the Arts Council. I think the Minister indicated that in the answers, I think, on Monday. That once those models are there, once there's something to talk about in terms of longer term sustainability, then the answer about the bridging funding will become more clear.
But the deadline for the orchestra is
15th of December, I think, everything.
So we've got 4 weeks.
Chair, there's also an answer to a question that I'd posed about the funding that had gone in from the department to the orchestra since 2010, which was some 10.9 million, which isn't inconsiderable.
The Arts Council Chair makes an annual
That's the money through the Arts Council, presumably.
Yeah, it's coming from this department.
Yes, yeah.
It's a considerable sum.
It's that distinction always between did it come from the department or did it come from the Arts Council? Yeah. All of it comes from the Northern Ireland Executive at the end of the day. Yeah. So, well, I suppose over the next 4 weeks we need to keep a weekly brief on this.
We'll endeavour to keep members up to speed on what the current situation is. But as I say, a lot of this is now in terms of negotiation, not only with Belfast City Council, but also with the Arts Council.
Could we ask then for over the next 4 weeks, because we know what the deadline is for getting a resolution, that we get a weekly update?
Sure, Christmas was the deadline that was given in the presentation, that if it wasn't so committed before Christmas that there would be no more to the orchestra, so I would appreciate a weekly update.
Over the next 4 weeks.
We don't want anything to slip
No,
by.
we don't.
I think everybody in this committee would be in agreement that we don't want the orchestra to fold.
Absolutely. And it also is a good thing, and just reminds those involved in the negotiations that people are keeping a watch on it.
Yep. Big brother.
Could I also then refer you to page 222 from the Causeway Coast and Glens Council regarding the legacy from the UK City of Culture and the proposed sports facilities in the North Coast region. At this stage, the only site completed would be the 3 courses at Rugby Avenue. Coleraine, very appropriate name. Are you content to note that? Yep. Okay. 224 Lyric Theatre regarding the breakdown of customers by postcodes, and you'll find that provided there on 226. List of customers by postcode in the pack is missing a page, but a complete list is being tabled now. This information has been supplied by the Lyric Theatre as commercially sensitive. I've asked that it's not distributed generally. So seek members' agreement to note and not include in the inquiry report. Then Irish Amateur Boxing Association correspondence at page 228 from them regarding the independent working group report into boxing. The Irish Amateur Boxing Association has accepted the report's recommendations, and with the financial backing of Sport NI has employed an operations manager to perform the duties highlighted by the working group. Now that's fine in as far as it goes, but it doesn't really tell us when that person was appointed, when they've started, and what sort of focus there is going to be on this. The response we got there, it's from Fergal Carruth, the CEO of the Irish Amateur Boxing Association. The recruitment of an operations manager with a remit has recently been completed. The person has taken a position over the last few weeks. Very near future, they'll be in a position to clearly report on an implementation plan and a realistic timeline to deliver the recommendations. Could we write to them in terms of asking for an update on that within the next, the person has now started, within a couple of months they'll have a fair idea of how that's going, because there is an urgency about it. It's been around as an issue for rather a long time. Okay, that brings us then to correspondence. Investing decal activity report is at page 231. There are 25 projects within the 158 to 224,000 bracket. Are members content to note?
Yep.
October edition of EU Matters is at page 235, and again, just content to note we're organising various EU briefings as per members' previous instructions. And then page 240, the department's invitation from the DEL committee to attend their evidence gathering session for the inquiry into post-special education needs provision. This was issued directly to the department as well, therefore are we content to note. Correspondence from Decal Languages branch on page 248 that accompanies the North-South Language Body report and accounts that are at the top table this morning, and will be held in the committee office for members' reference. Are you content to note that? And then the quarterly screening report from Libraries NI 249. Of the 4 policies, 3 are new, and the Culture Creative Development Policy has been revised. Policies have been screened out, the Quality Impact Assessment. Again to note. Chairperson's business. Decal invite at page 253 to the Minister's reception to celebrate Belfast Giants coming the 13-14 Elite League champions. Well done. And the reception is on Tuesday the 11th at 6:30. Please let the committee office team know if you plan to attend. Page 254, Sport NI regarding their consultation process for a new 5-year corporate plan. And after this meeting now, Eugene McGoldrick from DFP will be here to meet us and we get our lunch. And commitment, please, to stay and take part in that. I've had a conversation with him already, and it is worth, I think, having that conversation.
Sorted.
If I was given the authority just to make these decisions, that would be much simpler. Yeah. Attendance figures for members at committee meetings during the 13-14 period will be uploaded onto the committee webpage on Friday the 7th of November 2014. We should introduce a rule whereby we not only say the number of minutes meetings you attend, but the number of minutes
Spend at the meeting.
that you spend. Total those up as a percentage of the number of possible minutes.
I'm sure there's somebody out there adding that up.
There probably will be, Chair, I imagine. Yes.
That's good.
Yes.
And then finally, forward work programme. Forward work programme is at page 259, and Clark will take us through that.
Chair, the main things to highlight that are new are we pretty much, I think, have now heard back from all members on the visit to Ballykelly and Draperstown, so that has now been established and is organised. And the other thing I want to highlight is, and I appreciate we don't want to use Tuesdays, but this really was very little choice, is we have a briefing from the department on the outcomes of the new budget settlement for 2015-16. We're going to hold it at lunchtime on Tuesday the 25th. We will provide lunch. And the only room we could get was the Senate, unfortunately, but that's sort of 12:45 to 1:45, because I know business committee meets immediately after business is suspended, so we've tried to time it accordingly. So if members just want to put that in their diary, we will send out reminders.
What date's that?
Tuesday the 25th November, and it'll be in the Senate, and we're aiming sort of 12:45 to 1:45, and we will provide lunch for that.
Note that, and then I gather if there's no other business.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Right.
Chairman, it's just in relation to, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we had evidence here from the Milk Cup people.
Oh, yes.
I asked a question on Tuesday, and just the minister's fairly adamant there was money offered and it wasn't taken up. Obviously, this is from the Decal department. If I followed the presentation correctly, they said the only department they got funding from was DETI. So I would like a letter to go to the Milk Cup to clarify the position, because I'm afraid I'm confused by it all.
Chair, I think if my recollection's right, I think what had happened was there was a fund, but for the Milk Cup people to make an application, the money wouldn't have tallied with their time scale. I think that was what it was.
But that's different. Yes, but that can mean that they can't actually apply.
Mm-hmm. That's different.
That's the point.
I think they did in the end.
Yeah.
Because if, that's why I want clarification on it.
We'll write, Chair.
It was announced a few days after their deadline or something.
Yes.
I can't recall exactly, but we'll clarify that.
The timelines were out of sync with each other. But that means that
you're a sporting body with huge resources, you can apply. You're a full-time club with paid officials there all the time, you can apply because the resources there. think we have evidence that Mr. Sanford is a part-time employee. A bit of a difference.
Yeah, okay, well, look, we've got the answer that was given in the chamber.
Yeah.
We'll take that up then with them and
we write and clarify.
Get clarification on that.
Timescales.
Finally then, the next meeting of the committee is on Thursday the 13th at 10 a.m. in room 30. At this meeting, the committee will receive briefings from DCAL on sign language review, Belfast City Council on the inquiry into inclusion in the arts, and Irish Law and Bowls Association on issues surrounding minority sports. So now, closed session.
This is the Northern